Welcome back to the channel. This is 20 Storm and you are watching second and final part of What If Naruto Was Son of God and make Grafia and Gabriel his lover. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel, and for more exclusive and spicy content, follow me on Patreon. Link is in the description below. And now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Indeed, he didn't even wait for her to respond before continuing. Then I have found where he is hiding. I decided to save this information for you. After all, he did manage to worm his way out of your previous engagement. Virgil nodded slightly and said, "Then you have come for what I promised you, correct?" I was brash. I erred from that time. I have learned and now I feel comfortable leading. I will make him mine, she said, fighting back the sneer on her face and her humiliating defeat. He did not. He simply proved that he had no use for how I was. With an almost regretful sigh, Virgil said, "Of course, that is why I have held on to this until you were ready. After all, I only want what is best for my nephew. After the tragic loss of his father, I only hope he has gathered the skill he may need to lead this network. Sorry, I just found myself a little lost. Not all of us can kill our emotions like you can," the woman said, blinking once as though to indicate that she was waiting. With a faint undertone of annoyance in her voice, she said, "That is incorrect. I haven't killed my emotions. I will simply not allow them to get in the way of what I want. There is a difference. I do hope you can find him and bring him back to me, Kerrigan. I do miss him greatly," Virgil said with a slight shake of his head. He then tapped a few holographic keys in front of him, bringing up what appeared to be a large three-dimensional map with lines zigzagging in seemingly random directions, better known as the chain network. After a few moments of staring at the map, Kerrigan twisted her wrist and shrank it before putting it into what appeared to be a portable computer on her wrist. It flashed and glowed for a short while before making a faint click to indicate that it was finished, saying, "I will be on my way. Delaying this any longer would prove wasteful. It is a long trip. Do be careful." "I will, and do take care, Your Highness. I do not think that the kingdom has recovered from the last tragedy," she said as the room dimmed and Kerrigan stormed out. She detested that man because he was cunning and only displayed fake emotions. Lady Kagaya must be rolling in her grave as she hoped he would continue to lead a happy life so that when she and Naruto returned, they could murder him and exact revenge on his father. She tossed the thoughts aside and headed for her ship. Estimating the distance to Naruto's location based on the network's length, she cursed that she couldn't make her own chains to travel in, that it would take her almost a millennium, and that Virgil would never assist her. This was a power move for the man. In order to strengthen his position, he had to get rid of Kerrigan because he was unable to begin building his own army while she was in command of her fleet. She already knew that she would be returning to a different city. Although she didn't think it would buy her much time, a few of her most devoted and powerful servants had been put in charge while she was away in the hopes that this would at least postpone the militarization of the Center world. "I am coming, my prince. Just wait for me a little longer." One body was the focus of attention as it moved carelessly across the ground, his blue eyes observing his surroundings with remarkable efficiency and a curious, innocent expression on his face. A few black feather pairs dropped in front of him, as if a big crow had flown by. He could feel their eyes trying to pierce his body without having to look up to realize that he was being watched. He sighed to himself as he proceeded up the stony path ahead. 3 people stormed out of the stone castle's large doors, their faces filled with confusion and rage. He could easily recall them because it was difficult to forget the faces of people you grew up with. To them, at least, it appeared that way. Though the current races on Earth would probably perish, he would probably survive what was about to happen because he had already lived long before they entered the picture. With his arms folded across his chest and his eyes narrowed, Azazel stopped in front of the blonde man. It appeared that the 2 people behind him were in a similar predicament. "It was not wise of you to come to our front door," Naruto calmly replied. "Oh, and how would one garner your attention otherwise? Do tell, as I may use that method next time. But while I am here, I believe I should let you know that heaven and the devils have entered a state of ceasefire, one that I would like to extend to the fallen." Since he had nothing to fear from the people in front of him, they simply were unaware of that. From their perspective, Naruto was simply an exceptionally powerful angel, surpassing even Michael, who had been selected by God to always be by his side. "Oh really?" raised Azazel's eyebrows. "That seems like quite the fib coming from such a holy mouth. What reason would I have to lie? Did you truly think that through before you made such a ridiculous statement? Or would the better question be, why would I lie about such a matter?" With a hint of humor in his voice, the fallen leader asked, "If that is the case, then why are there no devils with you? Would that not be a more convincing way of showing that you had formed some kind of peace with them?" "Oh, then let me just call for one. Her name at least you should know, Lilith. Please come here for a moment," Naruto asked, tilting his head to the side in bewilderment as he watched as their eyes widened. He held his hand out to the side for her to grab as she landed, her fiery red eyes and raven hair making it obvious who she was. After all, Not many people could claim to have those two characteristics and a massive demonic aura emanating from them, not to mention that even the fallen could sense the lust and anger she exuded. Maybe it was so powerful that angels began to feel its effects and begin to fall. They didn't realize Lilith was more than just a powerful demon. They were bonded like siblings and he could call her whenever he wanted, which was a result of her clinging to his soul for so long. How long has it been since three of the great powers were gathered in one place? She asked, smirking mischievously as she landed with a feather-like touch on Naruto's hand. Not as long as you would think. Actually, it was less than a year ago that I met with Sirzex and Michael outside of Naruto's cabin in the woods, Azazel said with a sarcastic tone, though, I was under the impression that you were dead, Lilith. She smoothly lied, saying, me perish? Banish the thought that bastard husband of mine didn't have the power to kill me. He hid me away in Tartarus. Naruto here freed me and asked me to help the devils get back onto their feet as repayment, since they hardly needed to know that she was planning to use a demon army to conquer the world before Naruto appeared. Did she and Lucifer have a falling out? Azazel arched a brow at that. A shame. Maybe you could have helped him to not receive more grievous injuries during the war if he had have been more suited to one like yourself. Perhaps this was his chance, but wait. She was a devil that would be like slapping his father to the ground and then urinating on his body to add insult to injury. Lilith said casually, you really have no idea how long I have been in Tartarus, Azakun, since my first child. Just in case you were wondering, there was no chance of me saving him. In fact, I would have sided with the angels just to wipe him from the earth. Before squinting at the man. Though we are here to speak about something in the present, not the past, Lilith said. Really, you are always full of surprises, Naruto. Come, we should go inside. I feel as though there are too many eyes and ears out here for us to speak properly, Azazel said with a slight smile of guilt. After the war, Naruto disappeared, and for years, Fallen and other angels searched for him. Imagine how shocked he was when they happened upon the blonde in the middle of nowhere. As far as he could tell, Naruto remained an ally of heaven and was now touring the world negotiating a kind of agreement between the three major factions. He was walking on unstable ground that was full of fissures that could swallow him whole. However, Lilith's appearance at his side with a simple call suggests that he already had the devil's support for his idea, and the Queen of Devils had no animosity toward any of them. That was unexpected. He had heard that she was vicious and would murder anyone who ventured into her rooms without authorization, but now that I think about it, if her story were true, she was never there. Having spent more than a few thousand years in Tartarus, Lucifer must have used it as a ruse to conceal her disappearance. He led the two inside, waving his hand in a beckoning gesture as they passed through onyx-colored hallways covered in lengthy tapestries depicting past battles and victories. As they descended further, they were met with the sight of sizable groups of women, each of whom was holding sexy bodies that were almost too sinful to be permitted. "Oh, do you want some entertainment, Naruto?" Azazel asked, his brows moving suggestively. Lilith let her gaze rest on the women like a predator who has discovered wounded prey, and Naruto waved his hand slightly. "No, I don't plan to have Gabriel continue her bouts of frustration at me. Like I said, I have come to discuss a ceasefire and even come offering something to sweeten the deal for your side," he said. "Lilith plans on being professional while we are here as well." She paused in her speech as a thin cut appeared on her cheek, saying, "Someone is clearly not in a good mood to read me so easily. Fine, I will keep my eyes on the task at hand. Maybe I will play with Grayfia when I read to." Naruto's face lit up with a charming smile that Azazel was all too familiar with. It was the second most dreaded thing in heaven, after the female angel attempting to communicate with Naruto. "No, I am in a good mood, Lilith, but Grayfia doesn't need you causing trouble for her, understand?" Naruto scowled at what was going on around him, and Michael typically had to calm down his younger sister. That never ended well for anyone. "We should finish up here so I can relay the results to the devils and Naruto can return to, well, whatever it is he does when he isn't in public," Lilith remarked. "Really, you spoil them," referring to both Gabriel and Grayfia. "Whatever," she said in an elegant tone. Azazel arched an eyebrow, shrugged, and stepped through a big pair of wooden doors. Azazel waved for everyone to take a seat at the large table in the center of the room, which had grand seats arranged around it. As the vice-governor said, "And what do you believe you have to offer us?" Azazel folded his hands, seemingly considering something clever to say. Lilith nodded, and Naruto and Azazel moved to a pair of chairs next to each other, sitting across from the fallen angel leaders. It was Shemazai all over, direct and never looking back. "I will give you this. What you do with it is up to you, but should war break out from this offering, I will fight in full this time," Naruto said, reaching into his clothes and removing a black bar and gently setting it on the table. "What makes you think that black ingot is worth anything? We already have black." Barakiel's eyes widened and he appeared to be about to speak, but his other friend, whom he had known for nearly as long as Shemazai, interrupted him. "Is that tainted Forma?" He asked quietly, seemingly fed up with being left out. Forma was the name given to the metal that Naruto used in the Seraph armor. It was twice as durable as anything that had been produced since, and his deft hand could bend it into any shape. It could only be tested in its unadulterated state, before it had been shaped, and technology did not appear to be able to duplicate its outcomes at the moment. The ingot on the table had just solidified. It would only take the blonde hours to melt it down and reforge it. Forma, the metal used by the Seraphim, was only accessible to those possessing exceptional levels of pure energy, which is why this seemed like such a huge deal. It was something the Fallen lacked, although it was similar to being fed scraps from the angels. This would enable them to construct their own armor for the cadre, giving them a somewhat level playing field in the event of another conflict. Although it would more than tenfold increase their combat potential, they would lose their dignity in the process. He gritted his teeth and narrowed his eyes at the blonde. Seeing him nod in response to her question, it was evident that even though the Fallen cadre were strong, there was no chance against the Seraphim wearing that Forma armor. It is tainted Forma, pure, unfolded, without mar of my hammer or anvil, able for you to research and use to your will. I help the devils back onto their feet, and I offer you a way to defend yourselves from the harsh environment around you. For this, I ask that you cease the constant fighting with the angels and the devils. The current Mao have already agreed, forcing the Fallen into a corner. Naruto breathed deeply and widened his gaze. I am sure you can see what I am speaking of. Devils were avaricious and easily influenced. Shemazai smirked inwardly at the play. The best course of action was to rally their support before meeting with the Fallen. Now, two opposing sides had loosely, somewhat united in their desire to put an end to their conflict. It appears that the Fallen would be up against an allied front if they dared to declare their desire to go on this time. Naruto had really outperformed them. He glanced at Lilith and saw her broad smile, which made it obvious that she was already aware of these plans. Even though they disagreed on how to live, they were saddened by his attempt to persuade Michael, who appeared to be in charge of heaven now that God had died, that they did indeed know their father had died. He felt betrayed and weak as he turned to face Azazel and saw the emotions flashing through the man's face. In order to put himself in a state of peace, Naruto asked him if he wanted to get stronger, but if he did, the other two sides would react. But the next time a fight broke out, it was over for the Fallen if he didn't join them now. Now that the few remaining angels had loose ties to the devils, the Fallen were destined to lose their freedom, which was what made them who they were. To think that such a move would be played by an angel, the Governor-General said, gritting his teeth and letting out a silent but lethal breath. Painting the world in black and white is a mistake. This world is more twisted than most could believe. It is only after looking at it for a long period of time that you will be able to see this. Angels are holy and pure beings that are meant to protect the world and to try to guide the humans to do the same, calmly responded to the man's insult. With a slight dip of his head, Azazel looked to each side and saw them both nod sadly, saying, "We accept your proposition." A slip of paper formed in the air and floated over with the ingot as it lifted off the table and hovered over to the three Fallen. "Very well," he said, flicking his wrist. "Read this and sign it. As you see, the Mao and the Seraphim have all put their names on the parchment." When he lifted it up and read the agreements and rules, he discovered that they were actually fairly fair. However, when it came to the names, he discovered that the Mao and Seraphim had all signed it. However, neither Lilith's nor Naruto's names appeared on the page. He raised an eyebrow at the two and asked, "What is the meaning of this?" With a little wave of his hand, Naruto announced, "I am a representative of heaven, while she is the devil's. As such, while we have ties to our respected governments, we are by no means under their control. Our actions are our own." He added, "I would recommend having your own representative. It would make discussions easier for all involved, and it also allows us to move freely between the other areas to examine and assess the sides that have signed the ceasefire." In reality, it was not a problem for him or Lilith. They were free to come and go as they did. You couldn't really catch them. "You will be our representative Barakiel, while you are our friend, for the time being. You will not be allied with us directly. The only other one I could trust with this job is Shemazai, though with his work you understand, right?" Azazel and Shemazai appeared to be thinking the same thing. They both nodded slightly before signing their names and rolling up the parchment before throwing it back to Naruto, much to Barakiel's surprise. "When it is placed like that, I can't exactly say that I am of a high rank, yet not in a position where my role is pivotal to our survival. Also, you trust me to make sure that the other races are living up to their sides, and not to be swayed by their ways and temptations. I have the time, the role and the attitude for the job. Thank you for the explanation," Barakiel replied in a way that the two Fall anticipated. Naruto smiled kindly, but he was secretly frowning. Lilith and he weren't on the parchment because they had their own arrangement. If she moved out of line again, he would instantly crush her. She was aware of this, and he still hadn't filled the position where he was needed. He might write his name on the parchment after that, saying, "It seems that things are in order then. If you need me, Azazel, reach out and I will hear you." As they stood up, Lilith and Naruto both disappeared into their weird particles before their presence entirely disappeared, as if they had never existed. Azazel exhaled and lightly grasped the edge of the desk in front of him. It was a chilling sight to witness, and they departed, erasing any evidence of their presence. The one black ingot in front of him and the curious expressions on his friends' faces, as if they were wondering if that had really happened, were the only things that told him it wasn't a dream. Shemazai rubbed the backs of his hands rigidly as he asked, "The ability to move and vanish like that is frightening. Could they have been doing this the whole time? Could we even pick up that they had been here prior?" As soon as Naruto's feet touched the floor, he was tackled. Slender arms clamped down around his waist, and long, wavy blonde hair spread out over his lower body. Gabriel appeared to be waiting for him to return while he was in his room within the Gremory household, which is why the current state of affairs exists. "We will have to return to heaven soon, Gabby," he said, gently patting her head with his shifting hand. The vivacious blonde, who appeared to have forgotten that she was supposed to be upset with Naruto, said calmly, Can we take Gray-chan with us?" "Grayfia is in the care of the Lord and Lady of Gremory. It is not up to me to decide," Naruto told her. "And if it was?" Gabriel asked, turning around in his lap and gazing up into his deep blue eyes with her emerald-like ones. "Then I would say yes. I don't want to stay away from either of you. You are precious to me, Gabriel," he said, leaning in to give her a soft kiss while observing the slight flutter of her eyelids. "I am greedy. I don't want to lose anything that I care about." Gabriel pushed lightly on his chest to make him lie down as she crawled up his body, straddling his waist and leaning close to his face. "I missed you also." Gray-chan was released into my care. "The Gremorys believe that we get along well and don't want us to part when we return to heaven," Gabriel told him. "Naruto-kun, I feel greedy too. I do not want to let you go out alone, gallivanting around the dimensions looking for pieces to play with. I am not used to people worrying about me. For over 1,000 years I have mostly lived by myself." "Forgive me, Gabriel," Naruto said, pressing his lips into a thin line. "From now on, let me know where you are going. Speaking of which," she said, leaning in closer and pressing her forehead against his. A pout appeared on her angelic face. "I met with Azazel. The fallen angels have signed a ceasefire, meaning that they will start sending out the information of their Rouge agents to the other factions. Heaven and the devils will begin doing the same." "I didn't think that I was gone that long," Naruto continued. "You forgot about your trip to Tartarus and fighting off an army of demons, and taking back half of your soul from Lilith, not to mention doing something to her so she has become tame, of a sort to you," Gabriel listed with little effort, but his words did little to calm Gabriel's anxiety. "Ah, it would seem that I forgot about that," lamely replied Naruto. "I do feel as though we have imposed on the Gremorys for too long though. We should return to heaven also. Do not worry, I will keep Grayfia in my personal space so that she doesn't come under any harm." She was grateful that Gabriel had at least considered her quick plan for her, but he wasn't sure to whom he was speaking. Had he been preparing something similar himself? She had grown somewhat close to Grayfia, at least as close as she was to the other seraphs, so it would be odd for her to be without them. It wasn't that difficult, though, considering how far apart everyone was getting in heaven. The door to Naruto's room opened, and he leaned back. Sarah, the wife of Sirzex, stood there with her. "Lilith announced your return in the middle of dinner wearing a revealing robe. This wouldn't be so bad if it weren't a dinner with the High Council, who still didn't know she was alive, nor the fact that the recent healing of the underworld was done by yourself. This dinner was actually meant to act as a bridge into that topic." "Want me to go clear things up?" Naruto sighed wearily as he reached up and scratched at his chin. The words, "and how do you expect to do that?" almost made Sarah gag. "I will be what I need to be, Gabriel. Let's go," Naruto said as he stood up, rolling his shoulders forward as golden boots and bracers formed on his body. A tight white shirt covered his chest, and a large coat was scattered over his shoulders. The coat was a brilliant white with fine golden wings entwined into the back and woven tassels falling from the shoulders. Before Sarah could catch up to them, she stood in disbelief as the two of them walked down the hall while plain robes formed on her body. The Great Hall was easy to locate, mainly because he had visited it numerous times. He flung open the doors and saw Lilith on the table. Many faces were shocked as she crossed the table, avoiding the candle and cutlery flames with the poise that a noble woman would have. Her head slowly turned to the side and she saw Naruto, a smile that lasted until she noticed the frown he was giving her. He growled, "What do you think you are doing?" I was just having fun," Lilith replied, stiffening. "Get off the table and apologize for the mess you have caused now." Without wasting any time, Lilith emerged on the floor, bowing deeply to everyone present and saying, "I regret my actions and will attempt to make it up to you." The High Council watched in amazement, but it was obvious that the words were forced. A creature whose words alone were enough to make Lilith do something. They were also frightened by the fact that a woman too strong for Lucifer to control in the past now bowed to a stranger without hesitation. "Gabriel! How dare you show yourself here?" they exclaimed as they turned to face the woman who appeared to be standing slightly behind the man and clenched their fists. "Don't take that tone of voice with my wife," Naruto said, clenching his jaw and blowing out a section of the floor beneath his feet as attention returned to him. "There are two very different ways that this discussion, which I assume is now necessary, can be carried out. Calmly, with the council members listening to what has already been done and giving the final stamp, or well, not calm. I apologize for the troubles my sister caused you, but I think it would be best if I join in the discussion now, or things may get lost in the transfer of information which could cause for another event like this to happen. Is this an issue?" Naruto said, his voice free of tension as he turned to face the Satan. "Sears, who is this man?" exclaimed one of the council members as the Satans shook their heads. To be honest, they didn't really want to talk to the High Council in the first place. Having a fresh voice would be very beneficial. "Given that you are political members, and I highly doubt that you would actually know who I am from my name alone, I shall give you the title I am known by. Naruto Uzumaki, Heaven's legendary smithy," Naruto said, letting out a sigh as he walked to an empty chair and sat down, with Gabriel and Lilith standing behind him on his right and left, respectively. "It is a shame that those who would seek to control the government of the underworld are not even present on the field of battle," he said, observing their eyes narrow sharply and their fists clench at the table in front of them. "However, does that make angels monsters for bringing every member of our race onto the field to witness the horrors of war and help everyone understand why it is such a horrible thing so they can teach their kids about it? Is it improper for us to impose the consequences of our behavior on every family's front door?" he said. "I will not deny that it is," and there was a pause while everyone appeared to consider what he had said. "But that way, even if our government changes, they will realize that nobody wants to fight in a war. Do you know what it's like to watch a father and son stand up for one another, or to see siblings quarrel over differing morals? How about seeing your own siblings lose their minds and think they are monsters for killing someone else? That's what I'm asking you, council that tries to rule where the Four Mao cannot. It is for this reason that I haven't bothered to bring this ceasefire to your attention. 1. Because with the vote of the Four Mao, by your own laws mind you, any agreement between factions can be passed," he said, gritting his teeth as he looked at the council. He saw the Mao widen their eyes as the council narrowed theirs, and then he added, "Secondly, you know nothing of what we are trying to prevent. Angel, you have no idea what you're talking about." A councilman let out a growl. But when Naruto laughed, he became tense. "Hardly. I learned a great deal when I opened my ears to those around me," he said. "Since the old government was overthrown, hardly any laws have been altered in the underworld. Actually, there were only two. The council would manage the underworld in the event that the Mao were ever unable to form a harem. Although those regulations don't seem fair, this isn't my government. Maybe you manage things differently than I had anticipated. However, it has been noted that no council voice is valuable if the Mao agree on a single issue." Before turning to face the lord and lady of the house, Naruto gave the table in front of him a few light taps. "It has a nice texture, is sturdy, and has an older appearance," he said. "What kind of wood is this?" With his eyes wide, Lord Gremory was taken aback by the question and said, The wood came from a tree that is no longer available, having died out when the land became infertile." "Oh, that's unfortunate." He cleared his throat, got up from his chair, and looked around the room before focusing on the Mao. "Just so we are all on the same page, angels, fallen angels, and devils have come to an agreement that any side taking actions that could lead to war will be quickly disposed by the other two," he said. "The council should be there to advise their leaders, if they somehow get it into their heads that they are able to claw away more and more. That's how I became an orphan. Family and political movements go hand in hand. Remember that, Sears, Seraphal, Ajuka, and Falbium, as I have actually come to like you all a little. Lilith, Grayfia and Gabriel, let's get going. I still have to speak to Michael and the other Seraphim about this," he said, turning to face the door. They shook off their surprise at his command of the conversation and positioned themselves behind him. Ajuka turned to Sears and grinned broadly, saying, "It is in moments like that I believe I can see his royal blood shining through." The council excused themselves after Naruto left because they were no longer needed after the bill had been passed by them without even looking at what it contained. "He made quick work of the council and put them into place," Sears said, nodding slightly before pursing his lips in contemplation. "Even though I wish I had a better opinion of them, we should keep a close eye on them. Although that was done to demonstrate that we were an evolving underworld that would be more tolerant of those around us. Many of them served under the previous Lucifer. Was that an error? Until it's too late, we want to be able to tell. Why wasn't I allowed to accompany Naruto?" Seraphol pouted and complained she had come to terms with the fact that she was drawn to that man for some reason, and learning that he was a prince only made her inner devil happier that she should go after him. Because like he said, Seraphol, Sirzex began, he's going back to heaven now that I think about it. I once heard Lucifer talk about the baths of heaven, along with the restricted area and how taking a bath seemed to cleanse every part of your soul. I'm curious how it would feel. After Naruto had taken them to heaven, Grayfia had to wear a strange device around her wrist, but it allowed her to starve off the intense amount of light in the area. She looked around in wonder, as if the meeting had gone rather well. Lilith had been brought back and was now in a meeting with Naruto and Michael, both of whom were talking about the changes that would occur as a result of the ceasefire. At the moment, she was lying down in one of the large baths in Naruto's area, with Gabriel nearby, allowing her body to soak in the revitalizing water and the steam rising from it to clear her senses. The church, which they controlled, would have to change. They would be instructed to hunt only devils and fallen, whose names they were given, along with any strays that appeared, which were frequently on the list of names they were given. The angels themselves didn't really change. They mostly tried to avoid fighting, only intervening when it was absolutely necessary. However, she could now confidently state that she was the second devil to have ever seen heaven, with the first being the original Lucifer. In other words, she was the only devil still alive who could claim to have seen heaven, let alone reached its most secure level. I am beginning to think that the angels have quite the life of luxury, she trailed softly, rinsing her long hair in the water. I am starting to think that the angels have quite the life of luxury, she said, feeling the sheer power here, which was beyond terrifying. It was a natural defense against devils that would kill them without hesitation if it weren't for the bracelet. We do, and this is a restricted zone. Apart from Naruto, only Michael and myself are allowed to enter here, she said, with a slight frown on her face. Even though Gabriel could clearly hear her, this is the personal area of the renowned heavenly forger Naruto. In a way, entering this space without his consent is regarded as sacrilege. However, Eden was created here before being relocated to the 4th level, which explains why this area is so serene. That's the way the story goes, anyway. Eden, yes, one of our treasures is the Garden of Eden, which is still standing in heaven. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it while you're here, at least not right now. It is unheard of to have a devil in heaven, and to be honest, I believe that Michael is only permitting it because Naruto and I have both endorsed you. There is nothing he can do about Lilith. Grayfia nodded and relaxed in the water as a sharp crack was heard nearby. Because, as much as I hate to say it, she is the closest thing to a sibling he has. To banish her would be the same as saying that Naruto was not fit to be in heaven. Gabriel reasoned. Glancing over, they saw a nude Lilith standing in the air over the water. She grinned broadly as she touched the steaming liquid with her feet, then slowly lowered herself into it and extended her body, saying, Naruto will be back soon. Grayfia whispered softly, glaring at the woman with the raven hair. Well, talk of the devil and she will appear. I am a demon, not a devil, so that isn't nice. You shouldn't talk to your ancestor in that manner either. Sometimes the elderly need to know when to let the younger generation take a hold of the reins, Grayfia smoothly shot back. As the water appeared to heat up quickly, Lilith laughed lightly and said, Grayfia, is there something wrong with how old Lilith is? Gabriel's voice was incredibly sweet as he spoke. Gabriel is older than me, not to mention Naruto is even older, Lilith said in response to the Silverette's question after she glanced between the two in bewilderment. If we are going by age, Grayfia, you are essentially like a child here. Naruto's voice said, age is but a number, and the girls turned to see him hovering just above the water's surface, pushing it away with the tiny light orbs he used to fly. At least once you reach our age, he said, in my hometown, a person is still regarded as a child until they turn 10,000. I have therefore never known what it's like to be an adult in my home dimension. In saying that, children were expected to have a large amount of experience gathered in all aspects before they reached adulthood, he said, taking slow steps forward before plunging into the water. Additionally, children were forced to concentrate on a single training component during this period. I concentrated on the forge, combining the arcane and metal between my hammer and anvil. I initially produced flaws, but God asserted that they had improved upon the renowned artisans of the past by the end of his life. I hate that title. To call me a legendary crafter is wrong. I make tools. It's the people who use them that make them legendary. He sighed wearily. In a way, it diminishes the wielder's accomplishment. His wings spread out from his back, immobilizing the others. To be honest, I find you all fascinating, but I don't intend to attack. However, my wings are the source of the water's healing qualities and are capable of curing the majority of wounds. You are essentially taking a bath in my essence. Lilith laughed at the expressions on the other two's faces and said, you didn't know? To be honest, I sensed it as soon as I got there. Yes, that's correct, not to mention that there is a planet with powerhouses like you have never seen. The fact that you are unable to sense him must be frightening. Would you survive in the core world? The woman with the raven hair let out a weary sigh as Naruto followed. Lilith. All right, but just so you know, it will eventually need to be discussed in its entirety. How much longer do you think Kerrigan will allow you to deteriorate here? She laughed briefly when she saw the blonde stiffen for a second. You forgot about her, didn't you? I assumed she wouldn't make the effort to attend. I did everything I could to move her out of the line of fire, Naruto muttered. Lilith went on to say, Kerrigan is Naruto's childhood friend, observing the bewilderment on the faces of the other people. They were once engaged, but Naruto called off the engagement by using Kaiku, or the King's Game in one of the world's languages, in addition to the fact that worlds connected to the chain network frequently pledge resources to the king in order for him to continue his mercy. The core world's advanced technology enables it to accomplish a great deal. One world visited us a long time ago with a game that was comparable to the chess played here, but it was played on a planet-sized scale. Minato, the former king and Naruto's father, then expanded on the game, turning it from a planet into a solar system, she added, noticing that the other two were still observing her. She grinned broadly as she turned to face Naruto. This is called Kaiku, and is often played to prove who is a better leader, but is also a way to back out of deals if you are a good player, she said. The Prince of Chaos is a name that he was given when he was younger for many reasons. But he did get the Golden Armada Naruto in his first game of Kaiku against him. Kerrigan barely survived a day. However, he crushed her in a way that protected her, as Naruto stated. He is an innate gamer, but when you consider what transpired with the humans, he attempted to advance to a higher level. Here she was a demon, but she knew that too much of any sin was bad, which is why she mostly balanced them out with one another. You can see that their greed is simply too much for him to handle, she said, frowning. What took place? After becoming increasingly engrossed in the conversation, Grayfia asked. Lilith, rocking gently in the water, glanced at the two before noticing that Naruto was heading out. He didn't want to discuss it, which is why he was going, even though he already knew it would be useless since it would eventually need to be revealed. Babel was the first, Lilith said, letting out a little sigh as she closed her eyes and tipped her head back, feeling the hot steam gently roll over her neck as it rose. Gilgamesh, their king, bared his teeth at Jiraiya and Naruto, believing that his desire for power and greed had made him a god in his own right. He was prepared to take on the sky after crushing other nations beneath his feet. The second, and considerably more recent, is Atlantis. Since Atlantis was elevated to the point where it could leave the planet, there is no point in keeping it a secret. They thought they had enough food and resources to live without ever having to go back home, so when they did, they tried to destroy it. Naruto vaporized their ship by crushing them without hesitation. His power is extremely terrifying if something can agitate him. Grayfia gave a light nod. I know. I heard from Sears X-sama that he can use invisible weapons or something along those lines that cause your body to stop in fright. That was a test. I have no doubt about the fact that he was looking to see if Sir Kun had a high PI. What is a PI? Index of Sion. The highest one that has been recorded from this planet is 9, but after his encounter with the thing that lies in the abyss, I can presume that Sir Kun is probably higher than that. That being said, Naruto was known to have a PI of almost 50 prior to his departure. For comparison, though it is unofficial, Naruto believes I have a PI of around 20, she said, lightly waving her hand in the air, adding that he still had time to get even stronger because that number wouldn't stop rising until after his 30,000th birthday. 20 is still more than double the recorded highest of this planet, said Grayfia. That was gained by my body and mind from the soul fragment and what remains now that it is mostly gone, Lilith said, shaking her head. I say this primarily because I would perish if Naruto completely removed it. I believe that's why he didn't give it his all in any case. As I mentioned earlier, his psionic attacks are not the most terrifying aspect of him, as you are aware. A spell's complexity and power typically increase with the size of the magic circle. Then what about a magic circle the size of Europe? She asked, noticing the girl's nod. That is impossible. Gabriel looked down at her hands and clenched them tightly. She needed to get stronger, Grayfia said. That is simply too much for a group of skilled magicians, let alone a single person. She had spent a lot of time around magic, so she understood what could and could not be done. Atlantis and the 4 planets behind it were destroyed. However, the spell isn't really combat-worthy because it took a few minutes to cast. Having said that, it was a display of strength for everyone present, particularly the gods of other faiths. Over time, some have forgotten that they came to Earth with Naruto to protect the prince and have become enmeshed in their own greed. However, it was evident that Naruto would not allow this planet to be destroyed. However, he believes that something is eating away at this world that he is powerless to stop, despite his monstrous strength. What could be a threat to someone who is born to rule over those we consider to be gods? Gabriel asked, her eyes widening. Are you referring to the Kerrigan woman Naruto mentioned? The question made Lilith frown. Kerrigan, as long as Naruto can concentrate on her for a while, I don't think she's a problem. Their PI is too different. He was 20 points higher than her when he left, and from what I understand his 50th birthday has long since passed due to his metamorphosis. Change? Grayfia asked, squinting at Lilith. You might not be aware of this, but humans have only lived on Earth for about 39,800 years. Prior to that, the planet was inhabited by enormous creatures that walked around like dragons. She continued slowly, taking in their focused expressions. At this point Naruto was still whole, so I have all of these memories, she said. At least until Naruto and Jiraiya arrived, there was a malfunction of some kind with their transport which caused it to crash and all but destroyed the Earth and everything living on it at that time. He stepped into the empty space and took in as much darkness as he could, changing his body and transforming it in some way. When he went, man practically evolved overnight as a result of the aura's powerful effects, which accelerated Earth's recovery by millions of years. That, Gabriel began, but stopped herself. It wasn't impossible. She had witnessed God, or Jiraiya, as they seemed to refer to me, do a lot of things that were beyond her comprehension. Or were they really carried out by Naruto, who was just hiding behind the white-haired man? Jiraiya created the Seraphim by harnessing the power of the air, and this aura was so powerful that it transformed everything it came into contact with. First, Lucifer appeared to absorb a significant portion of Naruto's inner darkness. Lucifer was expelled from heaven after it soon became evident that he was beyond saving, and I was created to be his lover, and keep watch over him in my weak state from childbirth. He imprisoned me in Tartarus, where I created an army of demons, the same race as myself, made from dark energy and the negative half of Naruto's soul. I foolishly thought that there was something there after Naruto arrived. Well, you know how that turned out. Blinking quickly at the woman with raven hair, Grayfia swallowed the lump in her throat and said, so Naruto is hold on, what about Eden? The location where he planted a tree, now known as a Mickey tree, to serve as a link to this world. Eden was his first creation with this peculiar power, and it was essentially ground zero. Lilith wrapped her arms around her legs and pulled them into her chest. It was still being heavily guarded as a holy site in heaven before I was removed from Naruto, she said. Even though she knew there was no way that was possible, the memory of that time was enough to make her uneasy. Life was created by Naruto, or at least aided it in its progression. Gabriel struggled to comprehend the subject at hand, wondering if she would ever be able to stand by his side, or if, despite their current partnership, she would always be walking in his shadow. She seemed to be composed of some of his excess power. Clearing her throat, Grayfia said, the core world in terms of power, how does he compare to others there? He was rated as the 50th strongest person 40,000 years ago. He is unquestionably in the top 5 now. Kerrigan, too? Grayfia asked, knowing that even a little more knowledge would be beneficial. Lilith pursed her lips thoughtfully. Maybe 114? She was in the low hundreds? That was incorrect, though, because she was far more powerful than that. In comparison to Naruto at the time, I would put her at around 40 or even 30. However, if you don't have a PI, none of this really matters. Together with your leadership skills, that is the primary indicator of strength from the core world. Because of how young she was to receive such a score, Kerrigan was praised as a genius. Even though she had a low ranking at the time, it was a contributing factor in the initial formation of the agreement between Kerrigan and Naruto. So, Grayfia began, if Naruto is so powerful, why didn't he simply destroy Lucifer when he had the chance? There are several reasons. The first is that psionic attacks, or PA, are prohibited from being used outside of spatial dimensions by an unwritten law. The second reason is that Lucifer was once Naruto's friend. Lilith lowered her head slightly and said, PA destroys far too well when used by someone with a high PI. Nothing would have remained after Naruto's attacks during the Great War. There are two kinds of combat in the universe. The core world type and all other types. This is the harsh reality. They should avoid each other in this way because Searzeks are already breaking the law. As he watched the scene unfold before him and all around him, Ajuka clenched his teeth. He saw giant creatures floating through space and fighting with gleaming golden ships that looked a lot like the armor he had seen the Seraphim wearing. He asked Naruto for some ideas because he was stuck with his work, but he didn't anticipate receiving something like this. It turns out that this was a game that was played in the core world and that each citizen held a unique coin. Since this was a basic match, the rules were straightforward and easy to comprehend. Apparently there were more complex rules, but in this one it was straightforward. Destroy all enemy forces. The massive creatures charged forward, only to be met with powerful lasers from the golden ships, which tore the vast majority of them to pieces. The blonde's eyes were able to take in even the smallest details around him, which must have put a great deal of mental strain on the mind. He kept watching as he proceeded, seeing things from Naruto's perspective, which initially made him feel extremely lightheaded. The creatures had no chance because they were unable to react in time and were swiftly torn apart by Naruto's faster and more maneuverable ships, whose lasers tore holes in the behemoths' bodies and sprayed blood into the void. Ajuka felt a surge of energy and wanted to look around to see what it was, but he was stuck seeing it from Naruto's perspective. Fortunately, he looked up at a screen that showed him in the area above him. Huge blue wings, easily twice the size of a person, sprouted from each shoulder, trailing down like tapestries at the end as it seemed to break into small particles. Lifting a hand up, he directed the particles to the damaged ships and watched as they healed quickly and continued their assault on the massive creatures without stopping. The creatures turned to attack, presumably to defend the one known as Kerrigan, but doing so left them wide open to the attacks of the ships under Naruto's control. The small screen in front of his face showed the complete destruction of the creatures. "Your offense is futile, Kerrigan," Naruto said calmly as his large wings gave a few flaps and shot him through the space and past the line of behemoths as brittle. When Naruto landed on a planet, the ground beneath his feet was a strange purple color that seemed to creep along the ground and stick to the trees and the bottom of his boots. The ground gave a little growl and crawled away in fear, as if Naruto was releasing some strange energy. The planet's surface was covered in trees that blocked out a lot of the sun. Through Naruto's enhanced hearing, he heard the faint sound of something touching the ground behind him. His vision seemed to gradually adjust, and he could actually see flickers of blue flames coming from Naruto. No, they weren't flames. They just looked similar. Was this the psionic power Sears X had mentioned? The ground vanished, the soil turned, and the tree was uprooted and out of sight as his body whirled and he raised a hand to blow away a sizable portion of the jungle in the direction of the sound. "You are trying to hunt me. It's a good idea, but Kerrigan, you overlook one thing: the hunter is more powerful." Naruto turned quickly as leaves rustled behind him, raising his hand as Kerrigan's form leapt from the trees. Instead of firing, he took her attack head-on as two huge purple wings that resembled blades shot forward to stab at the blonde. The woman in front of him had a dejected expression on her slightly tinted green skin, and although it was her eyes, it seemed as though they were unable to look at him. Avoiding direct contact with his own, he pinched the two longest blades together in his right hand. "Naruto, I don't want to fight you, I really don't." Her shoulders sagged and you could see the pain she was feeling from doing just this much. Ajuka came to the sole conclusion that Kerrigan was in love with the blonde. She clenched her fingers and looked at him with tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. "I am not good enough, am I?" Naruto took a step forward, closed the distance, and put a hand on her sternum, leaning in close to her ear, saying, "Let me protect you for a little longer, Kerrigan." Kerrigan flinched as he clamped his hand down, crushing her wings, then quickly broke them with his other hand. Despite the pain in his chest, Ajuka realized that he was standing in front of Kerrigan once more, lifting her up by the neck and glaring at her coldly. It is an act, he thought, speculating that Naruto really didn't want to do this, that he didn't want to fight Kerrigan. Neither his voice nor the slight movement of his mouth to plant a ghostly kiss on her cheek before he extended his hand forward and shot her across the jungle were captured by the camera. According to what he understood, this would end their marriage. Based on Naruto's remarks against the council, it appeared that he was concerned about anyone being connected to him. He was severing his relationship with Kerrigan in order to protect her. Making such a choice, a part of him questioned who was suffering more, but he knew that he didn't want to be in their position. Even though it was cruel, he couldn't deny how entertaining it was. From what he could tell, it appeared as though they were compelled to engage in combat with their armies while people watched them on screens. As he watched the gasping woman in front of him struggle for her life, Kerrigan was clawing at his hand, her sharp nails digging deep into his wrist and arm as she tried to free herself. It hurt so much, but he could feel his expression staying the same. His heart ached and felt like it was about to explode. She fainted and her body broke apart as he slowly raised his free hand and placed it on her forehead. A loud roar echoed through the air. "Prince Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze Otsutsuki is the winner. I want a medic to heal any injuries that she has sustained and for her to recover in peace," Naruto said, ignoring the cheers of the crowds as he walked forward, took the coin from the stand in front of him, and had it go back inside his heart. Kerrigan was lying on the ground when he took her coin and placed it above her heart, watching as tendrils broke through her skin and dragged it back in. He then disappeared, resurfacing in the stadium where the battle began, free from any kind of disturbance. A few others began to worry about Naruto, grabbing at his arm to heal it, but he pulled it away and glared at the nurses, saying, "Heal Kerrigan, she needs it more than myself." Naruto's voice was quiet, but it was clearly heard as people gathered around him, placed the knocked-out woman onto a stretcher, and carried her away. The medics gave him doubtful looks, but they nodded and let him think for a while before a slow clap caught his attention. A white-haired man in his mid to late 20s stood there wearing elegant blue robes, and he said, "The outcome was as expected of your my dear nephew. Uncle, I would assume you had better things to do than watch a pointless game in order to void a marriage contract, which is a disgusting and useless thing." Naruto pondered out loud. "As family, we must be there for one another," the white-haired man said as he moved forward and lightly touched the blonde's severed arm. "Allow me to fix your arm here." "Do not," Naruto yelled, yanking his arm back and startling the older man. "I want to leave it as a reminder that even on the verge of defeat an opponent can still deal an injury," he said, looking down briefly, "and to remind me of a fraction of the pain I caused Kerrigan," he said to himself. "You always punish yourself so harshly for your mistakes," Virgil said, shaking his head lightly. "My dear nephew, you are still young. How do your parents feel about the amount of effort you put in?" Naruto looked at his terrified arm and made Ajuka do the same, clenching it several times until the wound oozed blood and stung deeply. "They're dead. I would be shocked if they could say anything," Naruto said. "I feel like I need to meditate. If you need me, I'll be in Forge later." With a gentle smile, Virgil bowed and said, "Do try to take care of yourself. You are the only family I have left." Naruto: "I get it. Virgil, maybe you ought to get married?" "You are of that age," Naruto said, turning away as his vision blurred and he appeared inside a pitch-black room with only a faint candle in the center. Ajuka was compelled to watch as the body he was in sat down, crossed his feet, struck an ancient meditative position, and exhaled deeply. He closed his eyes and found himself standing across from a blonde man in a white room, his right eye bright and unlike anything he had ever seen, his blonde hair slightly longer but still wild, and a strange white shirt with no buttons and sleeves that only reached the edge of his shoulders. "Ajuka," he said in a calming voice, holding up his right hand and displaying the scars that ran rampantly along his arm. "Naruto? I take it you showed me that memory for a reason?" he said, startled to hear his own voice again. He looked down and saw that his vision was moving and that he could even use his own body again. "I demonstrated that to you, Ajuka, because I want you to make the devils something like that." Not only was it an effective method of handling, the bang that covered his left eye remained in place as he raised his terrified hand and ran it through the back of his long, wild hair, allowing us to increase our military might in difficult situations. "I think it would be a good way to introduce the evil pieces," said Ajuka, nodding slightly. "It should also be intriguing to add a new dimension to a game. However, I'm glad you don't always look like this." "Why?" raised Naruto's eyebrows at the man. "You no longer just look attractive, you're tough and strong." Ajuka shook his head slightly and said, "If you always looked like this, there might not be any women for the rest of us." "Does your arm hurt?" "Kerrigan's attacks always contain a potent poison, which I have kept inside my arm as a reminder of my actions." Looking over himself, Naruto said, "This is how I look without illusions and when I am not gathering energy, even though I didn't think people would find this form attractive. I'm sure your wife will adore it if you show her your true appearance. However, I assume that you told us about Virgil? It appeared that you and him had a very tense relationship." With a slight nod, Naruto said, "He took the throne and killed my parents. I left when I was old enough to do so, and ever since, I've been controlling my powers and assembling an army to return and destroy him. Additionally, as you watch, observe what they will chain into, and take action to steer it in the direction you want. The wars are actually slowing down your progress." "That makes sense, and you have witnessed this unidentified danger. When I initially saw the armies she was commanding, I thought Kerrigan was the threat. However, after witnessing her face during your altercation, it seems like things might be more trouble than you thought," Ajuka said, rubbing his chin for a while. "I find it hard to believe that she would." "Most likely," Naruto said, floating into the air and supporting his arms on his right knee while resting his chin on top of them and letting his left leg hang down. "However, I am taking action to improve our chances. The new technique I developed to transform people into angels is not being well received, so it has mostly been pushed to the back of our minds. However, I believe I might find the plans for another project I had. Sometimes having a small group of highly skilled soldiers is preferable to having a large army. An elite force put together by someone that can control gods. I don't know whether to be excited or to fear them," Ajuka said, laughing nervously. "To be weary is always a good choice of action, Ajuka," the blonde said, turning away briefly as if to speak to someone else before turning back to Ajuka. "Lilith will be returning soon to get you Mao into shape. At the moment, she views all of you as little more than toys for her own amusement. You should disprove her, please." "About Lilith," Ajuka said, scratching at his chin. "You mentioned that she was your sister. By that, what did you mean?" He turned to the side and grinned slightly. "She held half of my soul for a long time. In a way, she is like my sister, my younger and weaker sister who struggles to control her impulses," he said. Lilith says she is going to work you extra hard for questioning our relationship. She was unable to handle the majority of my abilities, so even though she only has a small part of my soul to keep her alive, it shouldn't have any negative effects on her. Are you okay, Naruto? Ajuka asked, observing as a strange white glow crept over the blonde's body, covering his legs and chest to create a tight armor that radiated dark energy. The blonde arched a brow and then turned to face himself, perplexed. I typically hide behind illusions because of this white stuff is armor that I acquired from the void, and this is what some might refer to as a combat form. When I become agitated, it comes out without my usual illusions. Lilith is currently the source of my annoyance because she is constantly yapping in my ear. Ajuka, tell your parents that having a sister is a hassle. Damn it, I know you can hear me. With a soothing exhale, Naruto controlled his emotions. The abrupt removal of his unusual armor caused his hair to fly upward, exposing a single golden animal-like eye concealed behind his bang that was staring straight at Ajuka as if it were assessing him. The rest of Naruto's face appeared normal, but he could have sworn he saw it narrow as the bang fell back into place. I am neither good nor evil. I allowed the darkness of the void to transform and mutate my body. I have the power to destroy entire worlds if necessary to accomplish my objectives. He scratched at his chin lightly before shrugging. Remember that Grayfia and Gabriel were the ones who rekindled my interest in this world. Without them, I would have given up on it when the time came. Be kind to Lilith. Despite her brodish nature, she is still the closest thing I have to a sibling. Before he could respond, Ajuka was back in his lab, sitting in his chair, clutching the strange orb Naruto had given him, when a big crack ripped through it, shattering it into tiny pieces that spilled onto the floor before dissolving. He sighed and leaned back in his chair, noticing that only a few minutes had gone by, but he had witnessed almost a day of Naruto and Kerrigan playing that game against each other. Shit, I can't believe there is still such a difference, he said, rubbing his forehead as he glanced around his lab and noticed a case of evil pieces he had been working on. He got up from his seat and moved to the desk where they were lying, rubbing his hand over the case. They make use of a coin that resembles the one used by Kerrigan and Naruto. Although the races appear to vary from person to person, I do not believe that the coin increases stats. Rather, it merely enables you to connect your mind with others. They store themselves inside their recipient and allow a boost in stats. He sighed and rubbed his chin a few times before saying, well, I have time, making a game that contains the feeling of a mock battle, along with adding in the safety features needed so that we don't have issues regarding loss of life. Even though Naruto's seemed like extremely advanced aliens, their numbers were much lower than the beast-like aliens that Kerrigan used. Okay, for a while, I should be able to enjoy this. Lilith would have sided with him over the devils any day, demon or not, and Naruto felt more than a little proud to know that her allegiance was to him. He watched Lilith leave the room and return to the underworld to protect the devils for him. Letting the illusion drop from his body, he glanced down at his arm, feeling the sting of Kerrigan's poison coursing through his veins. Clenching his fist a few times before using his magic to isolate the poison again, he clicked his fingers, dully observing the tools around him corroding away under the pressure of his aura, and felt a slight breeze against his back. You can come in, Gabriel, Naruto said, widening his eyes slightly as he heard a frantic knock on the door behind him. You can come in, Gabriel, he said, not remembering his voice being so deep and smooth. He said, sorry, I must have the wrong room, I was looking for Naruto, as the door behind him slowly opened and began to close. You located me. He waited and heard the door close, then heard gentle footsteps coming toward him. This is how I appear under all of those illusions I use, he said. I don't care how you look. I love you for you, Gabriel said, putting her arms around his neck and drawing him in closer. Breasts served as a pillow for the back of his head as she gently kissed the top of it. You have the ability to make choices that are too difficult for the rest of us, and you are cold and heartless. You continued to hide us behind you, never once considering us to be lower-class creatures as the majority of people in your position would. Gabriel, your heart is so big and forgiving. I feel unworthy of your affection. I should tell you about Gabriel. Don't worry if Kerrigan is involved. I don't understand. But Lilith told us about the state of affairs between you two. Additionally, with their harems, desires, and other characteristics, devils lead lives that are very similar to those in your home world. I don't understand, but I'm willing to learn. She walked around and knelt down in front of him, slowly removing her arms as she took in his new look. He had changed from looking like a prince to a rugged man, with a slightly more defined jaw and a hint of stubble. He was no longer a shadow. She felt around his face with her hands up, pushing away his bangs to reveal his single bright eye. The other closed. Did something happen to your eye? Is it a part of that transformation you underwent? Asked Naruto. Looking down, she forced a tiny smile when she saw his shocked eyes widen. Lilith told us, I won't ask what happened, but I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for what you did, so don't even consider hiding it from me. She looked scared when she did it. With an inward sigh, Naruto opened his left eye, its golden iris suddenly snapping onto Gabriel. It won't move itself from the strongest source of energy near me, allowing me to always stay focused on my target even when they are moving around quickly. He said, however, if I leave it open during a fight, it can occasionally result in tunnel vision. Thank you, she whispered softly, leaning forward and kissing it, then moving back slightly and looking into his eyes as she wrapped her arms around his neck and sat on his lap. She felt it undress her completely down to the bone. Looking for weaknesses, she thought. Blushing lightly under its intensity, it was a power older than herself, savage and primal, and one of the reasons she was created. Naruto, were you serious about wanting to have a child when things were at ease again? His larger arms wrapped around her waist and drew her in closer as he rested his head in the crook of her neck. She gently dipped her own and held him tight, rubbing his head soothingly as he slowly straightened up and gave her a questioning look. She felt her heart skip a beat. My parents were overjoyed to learn that my mother was carrying me. According to Jiraiya, he sighed slightly and said, "Why do you ask? I want to be happy too, but I don't want my child to suffer in this cruel time that we are in." Is it possible for me to have your child? The slight shock he felt inside was concealed by a contemplative expression. I don't know, that is difficult to say. You would really need to ask my first wife. Yes, I should. Gabriel nodded sternly, then she realized what he had said and stopped herself. Do you mean that? I do, Gabriel. Okay. Then we should at least practice for when the time comes, yes? She said, nodding more to herself than to anyone else. Naruto felt his body being propelled through space and reappearing in his room, or, as Gabriel now referred to it, their room. Before he could reply, she gave him several butterfly-like kisses on his chest while her hands pressed him down onto the bed. Lemon. If you are underage or have problems with them, skip to the next bold. In her spare time, Gabriel had spent a lot of time conversing with Lilith, trying to learn as much as she could about the art of making love, which, regrettably, Lilith knew little about because, quite frankly, she had told Gabriel that the closest thing to love was when Lucifer raped her. However, she discovered the key information, such as the location of the penis, and that was about it. She had to use humans as an example for the rest, so she continued to plant gentle kisses until she reached his waist, unbuckled his pants, and slid them down. Since the penis is supposed to be a tiny piece of flesh that resembles a finger with a larger tip, she started by moving the small arm that was resting between his legs. Perhaps it was hiding there. She pushed the thought aside and began to gently stroke it, feeling a slight groan emanate from its owner's body. As she did so, she felt the warmth of the arm and it slowly stiffened in her grasp. Apparently, that happened to penises. However, it was much too big. She looked up at his face, but he didn't appear to be in pain, so she shrugged inwardly and kept pumping his member, watching it grow larger and larger until it stopped in front of her mouth. She looked at him bewildered, but she remembered seeing a few people suck on the penis, and she didn't know why, so she did as they did. She opened her mouth wide, swallowed what she could, and felt him groan through the shaft in her mouth as she licked the head a few times and felt it twitch. The taste was odd, and the liquid that came from the very tip, which initially alarmed her, was quite salty. With the shaft in her mouth, she continued to bob her head up and down, trying to wrap her tongue around the member in her mouth with her tongue. Her left hand lifted up her dress and began to play with her developing warmth between her own legs, while her right hand pumped the cock in front of her. It felt powerful to have this much control over his feelings from her simple actions. When she inserted a finger inside herself, she discovered that it was extremely tight, barely allowing her to move. This is where his large penis was supposed to go. She was surprisingly wet, which was odd, but she couldn't ignore the feeling in her lions. She didn't need to be knowledgeable about sex to know that it wouldn't fit. A horrifying thought occurred to her. What if she was just too small for him? She froze in place and slowly pulled her head back, tears welling in the corner of her eyes as she looked down at herself. When Naruto saw her reaction, he leaned forward and gave her a gentle forehead kiss, saying, "Gabriel, can we stop if it's too soon?" "Naruto," she sobbed quietly and muttered, "I can't fit your penis inside of me." He raised his arms and encircled her firmly, saying, "Gabriel." This was a conversation he really didn't want to have, so he said a little nervously, "It's a muscle, and you need to train it just like you would build up stretch in your arms and legs." "Really?" She stopped crying and gave him a bright look before saying, "I just have to train it?" "Yes, did you truly worry about this kind of thing? Making love is a part of being a good wife, right? That's what I want to be," she asked, seemingly perplexed. As he felt her move closer to him and press against his aching member, Naruto adopted a contemplative expression and said, "I don't know, it really depends on the relationship between the two. How can I strengthen my muscles?" As she cocked her head adorably to the side, she felt her pussy fill up and a hand firmly encircle her from behind, keeping her in place. "I'll assist, but in essence, you just need to expand it gradually. Doing so too quickly could result in damage and be extremely uncomfortable, at least that's what the books say. He kept pushing his fingers in and out of her while sensing her walls gradually beginning to separate. Her hands moved, gripping his cock and pumping it continuously as her breathing grew more labored. Gabriel noticed that her vision was becoming strange and that her body was getting warmer and warmer. At this rate, she thought she was inside Naruto's forge, but it was only inside her and not touching her skin. It was tightening mostly between her legs and close to her stomach, and she wasn't sure why. And Naruto, I feel Saint Kaya. As Naruto continued her training, her body went rigidly straight and her wide eyes stared up at the ceiling. Gradually, she felt her body relax as the warmth returned, and a part of her wondered if she had just exploded. She moved a hand down and felt a warm liquid beneath her. Naruto, she blushed as she attempted to pull away, only to feel his hold tighten. I go. I believe I just urinated. He explained, adding a new finger to his movements and feeling her lubricated walls camp down hard on him again, trying to squeeze everything they could. It was an orgasm, in simple terms. You felt too much pleasure to contain it properly, so it came out of you so you could keep going, he said without pausing. So I didn't urinate. At the end, she let out a little squeal as she felt his new finger enter her. It hurt a little, but not as much as it had at first, and her walls were gradually giving in to him so he could pleasure her more. She noticed that his penis was still standing at attention in front of her, so she raised her hands and continued to play with it, discovering that it twitched more when she focused on the top. Even after removing her fingernails, she observed the heads continued twitching and said, Gabriel, I believe I will come. Come? She continued to play with his head when she felt something splash on her face. She removed her hands from his penis and raised them to wipe away the strange white substance that was hanging from her fingers. When she put her fingers in her mouth, she discovered that it tasted salty, not as salty as the pork that Uriel had once cooked for the seraphim, which was simply too strong for the others, but salty nonetheless. It was strange to wipe at the substance on her face and then put that in her mouth, swirling it around and trying to find a comparison. Is this cum? She asked, gently grabbing Naruto's face, bringing it up to her own, and opening her mouth wide to reveal its contents. It was slimy and felt strange. She swished it around in her mouth, looking at the bright blue eye that was staring at her. He gave a small nod to her. So this is like your orgasm? He nodded once more, and she swallowed it without hesitation. What are you doing, W? Naruto stammered. I liked it, Gabriel said with a cute sideways head tilt. I was supposed to eat it, right? The next thing she knew, Naruto was hovering over her, nibbling softly at her collarbone, sending tiny sparks through her body as she lay flat on the bed. She let out a seductive moan as her body sank into the bed as his hands pulled down her dress and caressed her breasts, paying particular attention to the nipples before grabbing the left one and rolling it between his teeth. Are you ready, Gabriel? Naruto said, leaning close to her ears and speaking in a barely audible whisper. Well? She questioned with hazy eyes, only to feel his solid member pressed up against her loins. Slowly nodding her head had begun, her eyes widening as he stretched her a little, much less than he would have at first, but it was still very much able to be felt. WWY arc. I believe you broke something, she exhaled during pants, a little perspiration starting to appear on her brows as she struggled to combat the agony coursing through her body. He said softly, not daring to move, your hymen, or in other words, I just removed your virginity. Gabriel, let me know when we can continue. She took a few more slow breaths, and he saw her nod warily. She felt as though she was clamping down on him. It was unreal. She didn't think love would hurt this much, so she toughed it out by taking another breath. Okay, I'm ready, she said. Bangi hadn't moved much, but she felt a sudden rush of ecstasy, her head shooting back and hitting the sheets beneath her while her hands balled into fists and sobbed the bedding below her. She appeared to be rapidly filling an invisible meter with strong and precise thrusts, which caused her to quickly return to her previous state, with her legs tightly wrapped around him and refusing to let him stop. Naruto, I believe I'm having an orgasm. He grunted out, it's coming, adding, say that you are coming, Gabriel. She exhaled sharply as her walls tightened around him, causing what felt like a dam inside of her to burst. She looked at him, panting a little, and saw that he gave a few more firm thrusts before something exploded inside of her. Are we coming together? Yes, we came together, he said softly, glancing down at her body, which appeared to shine in the dimly lit bedroom light due to a thin layer of sweat. He put his arms around her and drew her close, saying, we should probably go wash up. Also, I can give you a book that Jiraiya left behind explaining sex talk, if you want to use it. Don't be silly. God wouldn't have a naughty book like that, he said, giving him a playful slap on the chest. She could be so switched on at times, but she could also be one of the most ignorant people he had ever met. Naruto simply shook her head while giving her a tight hug. End of lemon. standing atop a sizable hill with his feet resting on the hilt of a two-handed broadsword that had been stabbed into the ground, possibly the only thing preventing his feet from being stained red. He was surrounded by silent, desolate earth that would soon be enhanced by the decaying corpses that littered the grounds. 30 years had gone by since he and Gabriel had begun to practice creating children, and the memory made him blush a little. He shook it off inwardly and glanced down at the knight in blue and gold as he ascended the hill in his direction. Grayfia and Gabriel persuaded him to remain in his true form unless he needed to temporarily assume a different identity from Naruto, arguing that he could at least maintain an illusion over his eye now. He stood, revealing his true form to the dying humans around him, his bright white pants making him nearly stand out against the drab surroundings as this courageous knight ascended despite slipping and sliding in the mud at her feet. He had to at least respect her tenacity, sighing inwardly, "Artis, do you want a hand?" "No, you haven't used that name in a long time. Would you rather I call you Arthur?" A young girl, possibly in her mid-20s, was shown staring at Naruto in disbelief as the knight froze the helmet as it fell from its head. "How do you know that?" "I guess it would be surprising. After all, I am not Morgan, the spellcaster that you gave yourself to," Naruto said, tapping his chin a few times in contemplation. "I suppose you could say that I am the one who inserted the sword in the stone. Artis, a blade that was forged on my anvil and resembles the one you are holding right now. Even though you humans have made every effort, you still lack the level of skill necessary to reach me." Coughing up a lot of blood, Artis was just about able to keep herself from collapsing due to Excalibur, who was now getting dirty from the mud it had been stabbed into. "Why you forced me to do all of this? Why?" "To say that I forced you to do this is wrong," Naruto said, cocking his head to the side. With a sigh, he stepped off the blade and hovered a few inches above the ground, his feet bare and his golden hair blowing in a light breeze. "Yes, I gave you the means to be able to do this. I gave you the means to be able to start a war on a grand scale for you humans, but to say that I made you do this is wrong," he said. "Though I guess that with your current method of thinking, that by allowing you to do so, I made you." "But why me?" She coughed once more, but this time she didn't hit the ground because a hand was gripping the back of her armor, preventing her from falling. "I desired a king who could assess people according to their true worth. However, they also needed to be compassionate and capable of leading England to prosperity. Someone would be able to remove Caliburn from its stone sheath once they could fulfill these conditions. The reason for this is straightforward. As you will undoubtedly inquire in a moment, I want to assemble valuable human beings and have them fight with me. You are a skilled blade user, a person who can relate to others, and someone who allows herself to verbally express how she really feels. This is valuable to me," he said, effortlessly lifting her up until their faces were level. "Are you God?" This person in front of her had been able to have her play directly into some sort of plan, so he couldn't be a regular person, she asked fearfully. "No, at least not in the sense that you believe," Naruto said with a tiny laugh. "You are undoubtedly aware of the Seraphim, who I grew up with." With a numb nod, Artis said, Did I perform well back then?" "Artis, you don't realize how bad things are right now. Do you not think it odd that someone like me would descend to earth in your last moments? You are dying." "Yes," he said, observing that his words caused her to wonder. "I invite you to join me in defending people against dangers they are unaware of. I would spare you from this terrible demise, and you will live far longer than a human would." "What about Morgan and our son?" she asked, glancing at him. "As far as the world is aware, you passed away here, so I cannot permit you to directly affect their lives. However, I wouldn't mind if you sent an angel to the town where they were staying and had them, accidentally, drop the money outside their house if you were to, by chance, earn some currency for the area where they were. It's easy. Either way, you will essentially die here." Naruto smiled kindly at her. "You can only change things if you decide to accompany me, Artis, but nobody will ever know about it. Are you capable of becoming a martyr again?" "I am not permitted to communicate with my child. At least let me see him develop." She struggled to keep her eyes open as she spoke softly. "Yes, and as I mentioned before, you are not allowed to directly meddle in their affairs. Accidents do happen, though," Jay said with a smile that calmed her and gave her a sense of peace. Artis slowly opened her mouth to speak, swallowing the blood in her throat because she dared not throw up on someone from above. "I want to live, see my child grow up, and see what happens to England. I want to keep people safe so they can survive." "Well done, you may sleep now, Artis. When you next awake we will be in heaven," he said, lightly touching a spot on her body, causing her to slump. He looked at her for a moment, thinking, this was the outcome with the least amount of lives wasted. He shook his head and flicked his wrist that was holding her upwards, causing her body to float up into the air to be swallowed up by his wings. "I suppose this will be considered an act of mercy," he said, widening his stance as he looked over the field, which was still littered with men who were dying and clinging desperately to their last moments of life or feebly writhing in pain from the wounds they had sustained in combat. Dark clouds formed above him, and within them were millions of spears of light, barely strong enough to cause any damage to even the weakest of devils. No, this was simply to kill those who were already near death in the least painful way possible. I don't know what is worse, the fact that I have seen this so much that I no longer even flinch, or the very fact that I have stopped caring altogether about the needless bloodshed that humans bring upon themselves, the cloud said as it burst with a crack of thunder and bright rain showered down on the bodies. It almost sounded like a collective sigh raised from the ground as the pain it felt vanished with a slight shrug. He disintegrated his body and Artis, disappearing from the earth as if he had never been there in the first place. The next time Artis opened her ocean blue eyes, she was looking up at an unfamiliar ceiling. "Oh, you're awake," a warm, gentle voice said next to her. She tried to turn her head, but pain shot through her body. "Do not move. Your body is still adjusting," the voice said. "My spouse advised you to remain motionless until he gets back to ensure everything is finished." "Your spouse, that odd white-clad man with the bright eyes?" "Yes, I consider myself extremely fortunate that he took the time to listen to me and let me express how I felt." Gabriel's eyes widened as the woman rolled over in the bed, staring at her with disbelieving eyes. "I know he might seem a little cold, but he is a good man." "Oh, where are my manners? I am Gabriel," Gabriel said. "Gabriel, like the biblical seraph Gabriel?" The angelic woman gave Artis a slight nod in response to her question. "I must truly be blessed, though to be honest, I thought you were a male." Artis's throat was dry. "Yes, my gender changes from book to book, but I am female," Gabriel said with a pout on his lips. "You feel like nothing, like Naruto and Nona, and I'm not sure what's happened to you." "Naruto? Oh, you don't know his name? My husband, Naruto, is the one who saved you." With a raised eyebrow, Artis said, "I understand, he is your husband. I wanted to let you know that he was already taken, however." "Never mind," Gabriel shrugged slightly. Refusing to flinch, Artis shook her head and said, "I have had a child with the man I'm in love with. I'm not sure if I should use the past or present tense here." "Oh, then I apologize. However, I should caution you that why. I realize that I can't get back into their lives directly because, in the eyes of the world, I'm dead. However, I can monitor them in this way and attempt to assist them in an indirect manner. I don't think this will be simple, but as his mother, I can only give it my all if it's for my child." "Lucky," Gabriel pouted, making Artis glare at her. She quickly raised her hands in defense and waved them wildly. "No, I don't mean that being apart is lucky. All I want is a child, but according to Naruto, he doesn't until it's safer to raise one in the world. My son wasn't planned, even though I did want a child," Artis said, nodding slightly in understanding. "I wish I had lived long enough to make such a decision, to be able to raise a child in a peaceful era without having to worry about them being drafted into a war that started before they were even born. Additionally, you won't have to worry about whether you'll have to bury them because they died in combat." "Lady Gabriel, I think you're the fortunate one." The door creaked slowly open, and a short woman, barely reaching Gabriel's breasts, walked in. Her long white hair, which had the faintest hint of sky blue in it, was pulled back into a thick braided ponytail, and her faded pink eyes had a brighter pink cross inside of them. She was dressed in what some might consider a man's state of dress, which consisted of a white dress shirt and black pants with a gold circle hanging from each ear and a simple band made of the same material. The outfit was completed with a big bow to hold her top together and a hint of lipstick. "Oh, Nona, is something wrong? I didn't think I'd see you today." Gabriel made an offer. With a kind grin, the person known as Nona said, "Nothing is wrong. Naruto is just occupied with some recently discovered problems. Before I brought Artis to him, he asked if I could do one last check on her here." Artis's eyes narrowed, suggesting that she found the creature in front of her unsettling. "A creature? I don't really think I deserve to be called that. I've mentioned that this is pretty cute. Yes, we are similar, but you and I are both now arbitrators. I'll slow that down for you. Basically, we are the Seraphim's extra hands, but Naruto is the main one. Where he can't, we take action, and where they can't, we pass judgment. I still wonder what he saw in you, but it is not my place to judge the one that made me," Nona said, waving her hand slightly. "As you will realize, things can get pretty busy here at times, so much so that many protested him leaving to pick you up. Can you read my thoughts?" "Oh no, is the former monarch against having her thoughts read?" "I would prefer it if you didn't, in all honesty," Artis firmly retorted. Gabriel whimpered, "Come on girls, please don't fight," as Nona put her hands on her hips and shrugged. When Nona began to laugh to herself, she wasn't sure if she should be relieved. "My fight her? Gabriel, please, it's true that she is stronger than me. Yes, she is more skilled with the sword. However, without that, I am unable to locate a location where she could outperform me. Nevertheless, I will comply with the request to come here, girl or boy, depending on who you are posing as today. It was easy to step forward and swat away the feeble defense that the still recovering artist attempted to put up. Nona sighed slightly as she pulled down the sheets to reveal the knight's impressive bust. Shaking her head on the matter and placing her right hand on the woman's forehead and her left fingers on her heart, artist described the sensation as someone tightening a rope in her body, similar to putting the string on a bow. For as she felt stronger and more prepared for her duties. There, cowboy, good as you can get, Nona said, clapping her hands together as if to remove the dust. Since you enjoy acting like a man, I will now get you pants so that you can at least dress like one for this life as well. With a little growl, artist saw Gabriel gently hold up a dress next to her. It was actually pretty nice. It was white with light frills around the cuffs of her hands, and the skirt was free-flowing and loose rather than propped up like those fancy ones worn in courts. Artist sighed slightly in relief when she saw this because Nona had never mentioned a top, so she assumed she wouldn't be getting one. The dress has a bodysuit inside that is concealed from view from the outside, which may seem a little odd at first. You can move as you normally would. As she gave the item to artist, Gabriel grinned and said, basically, it looks like a dress but is practical. The younger blonde, who was staring at it in disbelief, noticed that arbiter artist was faintly woven into the covering for her bust. She raised an eyebrow and looked at Nona, who undid her blouse and revealed the same whitting on the inside, substituting Nona for artist. You were serious? Yes, even though we have the same rank, I have worked here for a few more years. You will receive training, learn how to read minds, and be instructed on whom to avoid. Not only does Naruto know when we do, but if you attempt to read his, he will block you. You will also be strung upside down by your toes and hit with water whips until you receive the message, she said, laughing when she saw the horrified expression on her new junior's face. Simply carry out your duties and learn what you are taught. Since that is how humans are made, most of it should come naturally. Gabriel was about to say, I would save that question for Naruto. With a slightly perplexed expression on her face. You were practically yelling that. Even though you are among the people we shouldn't read. I apologize, Gabriel. It's okay, Nona. I was just curious is all. A broad smile threatened to split the youngest grin's face. I don't ask questions, I just follow my orders and enjoy living my new life, plus messing with cowboy here is fun, the youngster said. Why do you call me cowboy? Artist scowled at the short one. You walk around like a king, but your tits are as sagging as a cow's udder. Nona simply shrugged her shoulders and walked to the door, pausing as she got there. If you want me to call you by your name, cowboy, earn my respect. Right now I can barely stand to be in the same room as you, she said, because kings are male, so you are a boy, and you have the saggy udders of a cow, so you are a cowboy. I will be outside when you are ready, she spat out. Don't worry, artist, they are not saggy. In fact, I think they are quite perky, artist said. Glancing down at her breasts in bewilderment, Gabriel attempted to lift her spirits, but all she saw of the seraph was her enormous breasts bouncing as if they were composed of rubber. Thank you for trying, Gabriel, or should I call you Lady Gabriel? Artist said, sighing to herself as she got up and put on her dress. I don't really care about titles, so do as you please. The majority of the seraphim will expect you to be respectful, but I should caution you that if you see a woman who somewhat resembles Nona in her older years, they are not related. Avoid making that error. In addition, she is actually Naruto's second wife and is a friend regardless of her feelings. Gabriel gave a small cheer as he observed artist slowly nodding her head while fumbling with the zipper on her back. Gabriel went ahead and pulled it up for her without being asked, securing the clips to hold her in place in case of sudden shocks as well. Thank you, Lady Gabriel. I said you don't have to worry about that, silly. Artist calmly said, I think it would just be best of me to show respect to everyone until I learn who everyone is and where they stand. Feeling oddly comfortable in her new attire, it felt liberating, as if she were wearing armor that was lighter than feathers. That is probably a good way to go about it, Gabriel said, nodding after giving it some thought. Now you should hurry along. Nona is waiting. Additionally, artist, please keep in mind that not everyone here had a happy childhood. I will try to be mindful of what I say. Thank you for the advice, Lady Gabriel, the younger blonde said, looking perplexed before noticing Gabriel's eyes dart to the door, probably gesturing that she was referring to Nona. Waving her to the door, the seraph smiled warmly and said, now run along. I am not very hard to find if you want to talk about anything, and I am normally quite free. If necessary, I will bear that in mind. And once more, thank you, artist said, bowing slightly as he walked into the hallway where Nona was waiting. I am ready. Yeah, I get it, hold your udders in, she said, snapping her fingers to create a cage-like structure around them. Then, as it filled, they felt a powerful pull and reappeared atop a huge cloud. Artist was steadily walking when she caught a glimpse of Nona walking straight ahead as if nothing had happened. Then he tapped the shoulder of a blonde man who appeared to be meeting with someone else. He turned slowly and gave her a look of bright blue eyes that made her freeze. This was the Naruto she had been told about, and he said, "Artis, come here, there is someone that would like to meet you." She questioned why a person from heaven would want to meet her, but she complied with his request because Nona's glare made it obvious what she should be doing. "Coming," she said, bowing her head slightly before turning to see what appeared to be a younger Naruto sitting across from him. If she had to guess, they must be brothers. "So, this is the renowned King Arthur, or was it Artis?" Michael's voice was velvety smooth. "I would prefer to go by Artis, my lord," she said, lowering her head once more. "Haha, I see you don't know who everyone is yet, so that would make sense as to why you are treating me with respect unless you really do know who I am, but if you did then you would know that I didn't like to be seen as above others," Michael said, raising an eyebrow before chuckling slightly. "Please refer to me as an equal Artis. My name is Michael." Artis made a slight head bow, which made Michael smile broadly. "I understand, Michael, though it may take some time getting used to addressing one such as yourself as an equal," she said. "Since my friend here needs to make sure everything is in order and to activate your eyes, I can only ask that you give it a shot. Would you kindly deal out our new cards, Nona?" Artis watched in mild amazement as the young girl quickly picked up the cards on the table and began to move her hands. "Artis, could you please come closer?" "Okay, now close your eyes for a moment," Naruto said, making the blonde stiffen before nodding. She pulled her eyes away from the cards as she approached him and knelt down a little after realizing that he and Michael were sitting there and that there was a slight height difference, but not much. After a few moments, she began to feel a prickling sensation inside of them. "Do not open your eyes, and do not scratch at them until I tell you otherwise," she said. She wanted to nod, but decided that would be a bad idea, so instead she just puffed out her cheeks and kept looking at the inside of her eyelids to where she thought Naruto was still seated. The prickling started to get worse, and a few tears slipped from the corner of her eyes at the irritation. But then it stopped as abruptly as it got worse. "You can open your eyes now," Naruto's voice said softly against her ears, and when she did as he instructed, she was met with the sight of 2 fingers millimeters away from her vision. She stiffened and retreated by a strange array of vision, and she was certain that it was her vision. Her head snapped to Nona, who had a gray outline with strange wings made of what looked like steel. She turned to Michael and saw golden wings and a holy aura radiating from him. Then she turned to Naruto, her heart skipping a beat as she saw what he looked like. Large blue wings of flames that seemed to blanket everything around him in their glow were flowing unceasingly from his back. Unlike Michael, who had 12 wings, Naruto only had 2, but the sheer difference in their size and apparent complexity seemed to make up for it. Slowly, she held up a hand to Naruto and said, "Why do you have horns?" "The eyes that I just activated allow you to see our true form, and what we can turn out to be," said the blonde, sighing as Nona began to deal the cards to Michael and Naruto. "If you ever see someone with horns like mine, I want to make it very clear that those in my family have horns like the ones you see on my head. Tell me right away. I can't emphasize that enough, Artis. I think there is a big group of people that will have horns like yourself, Naruto," Artis said, clearing her throat slightly. "Naruto isn't a devil cowboy." Nona sighed once more as Naruto raised an eyebrow. "I'll let you try to figure it out on your own because telling you what he is right now would make you angry and I can't bother trying to calm you down. Just know, though, that what you are going through right now is a meeting between the 2 individuals who govern heaven. Now consider this. Could a devil possibly be permitted to enter heaven, much less guide holy beings? But what about G? Do not mention God. If I must, I will explain it later to you, cowboy. Until then just nod your head and do as they ask. This is the easiest of our jobs and one that only the highest of angels ever get the chance to do," Artis said, stiffening as he turned to face Nona, who was giving her a glare. "I am sorry that there can't be more of your kind yet, Artis, Nona," Michael said, grinning sadly at Artis. "However, the majority of Seraphim oppose resurrecting humans as angels for the time being. You must serve as Naruto's agents, or as he refers to you, arbiters. That is, people who make decisions. Angels are without a doubt the strongest of the 3 factions," Naruto responded, pressing his lips together in contemplation as he examined the cards in his hands, placing them face down on the table and leaning back while gazing up into the sky. This statement caused everyone to turn to face him, but they have let this go to their head, thinking that if they change at all it will only be an insult to the ways that they have lived and what they were able to achieve. He said if things continue as they are, heaven will be reduced to nothing more than the Seraphim chatting in 10,000 years. "I understand," Artis offered, and to be honest, she wasn't sure how to react to someone telling her that heaven wouldn't succeed. It seemed absurd. The older blonde exhaled and said, "No, you don't. Even so, you continue to think like human beings, and you all realize how fleeting life is. You no longer age from now on. So Artis, You will always look the same as you do now. It is possible for your hair to grow, but much more than that is not feasible. You and Nona are the current arbiters, and the true reason for this is straightforward: to demonstrate to heaven that people who were once considered human can still assist heaven. I want to take away some of their harsh opinions. Some of my brothers can be a little old-fashioned at times, she said, turning to face Michael, who smiled tautly. However, in reality, they are merely doing as we were instructed, not everything we were taught, though. Misunderstanding? Artis made an offer. The child said, no, more like they do not believe that most of what God said was aimed at them, just that they should force the humans to enforce it upon themselves, before sitting next to Naruto and leaning against him. There are 3 main factions you need to know about, Cowboy, she said, expecting Michael to respond. The devils, which you thought Naruto belonged to, the fallen angels, and angels, of which we are a part, although they mostly collapsed due to what appears to have been a manufacturing error. There is a lot of controversy surrounding them. Hold on, an error? Yes, to put it briefly, the Seraphim's auras created the regular angels. We are created from a large amount of Naruto's aura. We cannot fall, and we can see the true nature of those around us, Nona said, turning to face Artis and clicking her fingers. Anything that was deemed by the Seraphim at the time would result in the angel made with their aura to lose their white wings as an act of shame, she explained to Control Cowboy. You will have to learn this. Simply concentrate on your wings emanating from your shoulder blades to bring them out. Despite how sharp they appeared, Artis discovered that it didn't even hurt when they came out. This explained why there were gaps in the back of her dress, even though she couldn't see them as clearly as she could see Nona's. Mine seemed to be rusty, she trailed, wondering if she wasn't good enough. You need to learn, Cowboy. As I mentioned, your wings will get sharper and more glossy the more useful you become. As Michael chuckled lightly, Nona sighed slightly and pinched the bridge of her nose, saying, you must sharpen both your body and mind in order to sharpen your wings. Naruto appeared to have grown bored and was now observing his surroundings. Long accustomed to the disrespectful treatment she received from the smaller woman, Artis nodded. So, when do we begin my training? When did we ever say we would be training you? Nona asked, raising an eyebrow and laughing. If everything is given to you on a platter, will you really be any different from the angels? Nona sighed wearily, observing the confused expression on the blonde's doll-like face. No, is the response. To put it simply, you will develop your own refinement, judgment, and self-improvement skills. Here you can ask for assistance, but you won't always get the answer directly. At most, you'll get suggestions that will help you get back on track. After that, what's the point, then? I both love and hate humans, Naruto said, releasing a tiny breath. They are weak animals that are always struggling to survive. Nevertheless, in order to survive, they will cheat, lie, and steal as they scuttle through the mud and hack their way to the top. They could never be judged by someone who has never lived such a life. Sighing, he tapped the table between himself and Michael, causing the cards to fly up, indicating that Naruto had the winning hand. In that aspect, I took the frailty away from you, but want to keep your human nature as you make your judgments, he said, indicating that he had chosen both of you because neither of you died the way you wanted to and neither of you had an enjoyable life in all aspects. Is the game over already? He asked, extending his shoulders as the cards between him and Michael burned to the ground. It is. Better luck next time, Michael. Thank you, but I think I might need a little more than luck to defeat you. A lot of angels misunderstand Naruto because they continue to believe that he is an angel to begin with, Michael said softly, causing the woman to meet his gaze and nod. Avoid trying to fit everything into your preconceived notions about a particular race. I understand and will try my best to live up to the expectations of you all, Artis said, bowing her head slightly as she turned to face Michael. Naruto's face, which she could see with her new eyes, was both terrifying and enchanting. He was definitely not an angel, but she could also safely say that he seemed much too bright to be evil. But what exactly is Naruto, I wonder? Really, sometimes all your games can get frustrating, Nona said, shrugging her shoulders as she glanced at the 3 blondes. Just think of Naruto as your new king and leave it at that for the moment, she said, letting out a sigh as she crossed her arms beneath her chest. Some of the devils are aware of Naruto's true nature, and the other races are beginning to realize that he is a significant figure in heaven. However, it is up to you to determine what he is. Artis turned to face the blonde man with the flaming halo. According to Nona, he was not only her boss but also one of heaven's leaders, not to mention that Gabriel, one of the Seraphim, was his wife. Biting her lip, she locked eyes with him. Those golden eyes stared right into her soul, feeling both hope and dread, as if he could tear her apart with a single glance. She nodded her head lightly, steeled her nerves, and said, I am ready for any challenge you can think of. Good. Then let us begin. Artis. Water cascaded down golden pillars and gently landed in the large baths in the restricted area. Naruto sat in the center of the bath, allowing the water to purify him while someone else gently massaged his back, her delicate fingers lathering his back as she kneaded his muscles, which were strained, tight, and exhausted from working too much earlier in the day. The massage on his back paused as a groan escaped his lips. "Naruto-sama, is it still feeling good?" The beauty behind him spoke softly, and she still occasionally found it hard to accept that she had attempted to fight him on the orders of a stupid group of leaders. As she delved further, Naruto moaned, "It's great, the woman's fingers were like magic. How was your day?" "Interesting." After a brief pause, as though considering her response, she said, "I met Artis, she seems lost." Grayfia continued to think about the blonde woman, who was occasionally awkward but made an effort to maintain a facial expression that conveyed her importance. To be honest, though, it was unbelievable that she had mistaken her for Nona's sibling. They didn't even resemble each other. Artis has always been troubled. She took up a position where she was forced to become a man, yet had to constantly fight against her emotions and needs as a woman, Naruto said with a slight frown after pursing his lips. "She is someone I greatly admire for doing so, which is probably why I don't mind that she took longer than Nona to find her place." Nona compared to Artis, "I don't know much about her, even though I've known the former for a lot longer." To be expected, he sighed as a pair of arms wrapped themselves around his shoulders and her chin rested softly between her arms and his neck. "Nona doesn't trust anyone except myself," he said, even though she's always smiling. Even Michael is unable to converse with her normally without her mask on, demonstrating how lonely she truly is. "So why does she have faith in you?" she questioned in her relaxed state before flinching when she noticed what she asked. "Please, foe." "Grayfia, why do you trust me? Did I not almost kill you? You took me in and gave me a place I belonged when no one else would have," she said, her chest rising and falling as she took a deep breath. She froze at his words, realizing that she would have died from the injuries he had caused her, but that she was here now because he had saved her life, because he had set her free. "You took me in and kept me safe when others would have cast me aside because I was too much of a burden or because of where my ties used to be. Nona is similar in that regard." "Shush." Before the door slowly opened after a gentle knock, Gabriel entered with a tense expression on her face and said, Naru-kun, there has been a small problem." He raised an eyebrow at her and told her to go on. Nona and Artis seemed to have had a disagreement. She hesitated a little, not sure how he would react to the news. "Ah," Naruto said, pulling Grayfia up with him. The silverette slid down from his shoulders and stepped beside him. She bowed her head lightly to Gabriel and said that Seraph was having trouble keeping her eyes above waist-chest level. She thought that both of their bodies were very attractive, and she wondered what it would be like to have children with them both. After all, she had only really felt Naruto's body pressed flush against her. However, there was a peculiar allure to Grayfia's body. It was curvy, not slender as some human women aim for, and her hips were wide, making her good for child-rearing, while her waist was slim. Her arms and stomach had the smallest lines of definition, and her breasts were amazing. So much so that water was streaming down her body. And her face was flawless despite the very little makeup she wore. Just a very light coat of lipstick, which gave her lips a much more appetizing appearance. Her gaze was immediately drawn to her blonde husband, who was stretching lightly, his muscles rippling, his rugged face tilted to the side with his head as his neck popped back into place. He was obviously exhausted from working in the forge all day, but he would not even think twice about lending a hand if his wives or arbiters needed it. Before landing on the bath's surface once more, he leapt out of the water just far enough for his feet to touch the surface. He then leapt into the air and flipped over, losing the water that had been on him as a pair of pants formed on his legs. "Could you take me to them?" he asked softly, but she didn't think his soft voice was appropriate given his more mature appearance. Prior to Artis sighed wearily as she sank into the bath, which was designed for the arbiters since there were only two of them and they were both female. It was fine for now, but she could not see the mixed-gender bathing working well in the future. However, it seemed to work with Naruto and the others, though perhaps that was because they all loved him? She had love for Immortal, her husband and her child, and had made several attempts to see how they were doing, but it appeared that Morgan had put up some sort of barrier that prevented her from finding them. She felt a twinge of pain in her chest. "There was no point in that, I already knew you were crying, cowboy," Artis said as she rubbed her eyes and looked up to see Nona entering the bath on the other side. She clutched at her heart lightly as her body sank into the water, tears welling up in the corners of her eyes because all she wanted was to see her child. Artis scowled deeply because Nona was constantly correcting her or pointing out her shortcomings. It was old after the first day, but she had already had enough after almost a few weeks of this strange new life. "Call me Artis." She let out a growl, almost giving the young woman a glare. "Stop making mistakes and I might," Nona calmly replied, tilting her head to the side as she began washing her hair. Why are you always like this?" Artis said, gritting her teeth as she watched Nona look at her bewildered. "I'm trying I'm doing everything I can, but I'm still getting used to this. Why don't you just be kind? Why ought I to? Nona asked, scowling deeply now that she was not washing her hair. Why should I assist you? Whether you're trying or not, why should I care? Simply do your job correctly. Artis clenched her fists and got up, approaching Nona, who was devoid of expression. What's wrong with me, Nona? Every time you make a mistake, Naruto has to fix it, the woman said, turning her head away so that he doesn't have to clean up after you. I want you to quit messing up. He does what? The blonde asked, stunned by what her senior had just said. Naruto cleans up after us whenever we make a mistake, cross the line, or look foolish. The least you could do, cowboy, is try to get your act together. He is always watching out for us, keeping us safe, and providing us with a place to go back to, Nona growled. Impossible, Artis said, shaking her head from side to side. Shut up, shut up, shut up, Nona yelled as she stood up, her fists clenched so tightly that blood trickled from under her nails. An open palm struck the side of the Silverette's face, cutting her off. Artis was glaring at her with daggers, but there was still a hint of shock in her eyes, as if she hadn't expected herself to do that. Nona, however, retaliated by giving the woman a straight jab to the face, sending her flying across the bath and into the other end. As she pulled her body away from the wall, Artis blinked a few times. Her strained muscles and jostled neck were already healing themselves, and she could feel it happening quickly. She fell to the ground and glared at the young-looking woman, asking, "What the hell is wrong with you?" "With me? You ungrateful bitch, I'm all right. Who the hell just slapped someone? You slapped me?" "Someone who is tired of you treating her like a footing. I'm not one to be easily aggravated like this, but I feel as though you deserve it," Artis said, craning her neck to the side and feeling a big crack pop back into place. "Weeks now, you have been doing just that." The pale hand of Nona diverted Artis's first strike past her delicate face and out past her shoulder before diving in with a solid elbow strike to the older-looking woman's stomach. Artis flashed forward in a burst of speed. Nona did not give a single inch. She would spar with him whenever Naruto and she had free time. She was aware that he was taking it too easy on her, but Artis was moving slowly for her. The elbow was followed by a rolling shoulder that snapped the blonde's head sideways, possibly breaking some bones in her chin, and then landed 3 quick strikes on Artis' chest, creating a tiny gap between them that allowed her to crouch down just enough to bend her knees and muster up the strength in her legs for a fly kick that knocked the glistening blonde through the door. "You don't deserve my respect. That means that I can only treat you as beneath me," the little girl sighed as she was about to hear it about the door. She knew Artis could hear her because she could hear the blonde picking herself up down the hallway. "And I don't know how to treat you as anything between," she thought to herself. Before Naruto found her and gave her a purpose for life, she was little more than a prisoner forced into labor so that she could eat garbage. She knew a life that she would not wish on anyone, and it truly troubled her to see Artis, who was so fortunate and had been given so much, fumble around and still be making such easy mistakes after all this time. Nona stood by her words, still unable to comprehend why Naruto had selected her to serve as an arbiter. She clenched her fists and gritted her teeth, wondering what it was about Artis that made the large-breasted woman so significant. Was it the way she looked? Undoubtedly, given the way Naruto now appeared, he could win over almost anyone, and it appeared as though Artis was devoted to the man she loved. Blood trickled down her white knuckles, and Artis was showered with love while living under the guise of Arthur, even finding a man to love her despite the facade she put on. One was dying in a war she didn't want to fight, and the other decided to end her own life to stop her abuse. Nona, the closest thing she had experienced to love was when Naruto prevented her from jumping into the spike pit. When her use ended, one was discarded, one was worshipped, and one was scorned. "You're skilled." Nona looked slightly up as Artis entered the room again, her hair flattening against her wet skin from the blood dripping from her forehead. A scowl etched deeply on her face. She could still hear the faint sounds of whips being cracked as agonized cries roared in the near distance. "Not enough, not even close enough," Nona said, pursing her lips slightly. "In comparison to the powers that exist, I feel even smaller than Naruto." "Why do you detest me so much? My performance can't be the only reason, can it?" Nona muttered something that Artis was unable to understand. Are you able to repeat yourself? "I'm not sure how to handle you. You don't deserve my respect as someone above me, but you're not worthless either. You irritate me because you can make mistakes and then look back at them with an uncomfortable smile. I don't know how to take it slow and can only give it my all. You're different from me, not just in how we look. I watched your life." "Well, parts of it," Nona said, but Artis' expression changed as she blinked in surprise. "You are positive I am negative?" As Artis opened her mouth to speak, she remembered Gabriel saying, "Not everyone here had a happy childhood." "Artis, please be mindful of that." At the time, she was unable to understand what the seraph was talking about, but now, could it be that she had been talking about Nona? She scowled inwardly, wondering if she had simply been so pampered that it felt like her life had been awful, or if Nona had simply had it so much worse that her own life appeared to be a good one. I am not sure that I follow you. Her back was burning, along with the places Nona had struck, and she hadn't even seen the little girl move, so she couldn't react. At best, it seemed like Nona wasn't going to attack. And hopefully that stayed the case. Yes, her body might be much more sturdy than the wall of a castle, but she wasn't used to feeling herself crash through metal and stone like it was nothing. Mostly because I don't want to. I'm not getting into it. However, you felt warm, content, and loved and supported as I was about to put an end to everything. The only thing I had came to me. Get out of here. Naruto, I'll fix up the door and the bath. Nona smiled painfully and then shook her head lightly. For Artis, that explained a lot. Naruto saved the poor girl from herself, and she now practically worshipped him for it. He gave her a home, a place to call her own, and people who made her smile every day. Nona thought this must be paradise, but then she entered and began making mistakes, adding extra work to the subject of her admiration, and she would be upset if she were in Nona's position. Really, ICA, was her reaction when the younger-looking woman told her to just leave it to her. Hello, Artis, I said, I have it, just go play with those udders of yours or something. Okay. Nona gave her a broad smile that didn't convey any emotion, but it appeared to be a way for her to show that she was at least somewhat content. In all honesty, Artis had forgotten and thought Nona was a book written in a language she didn't understand. Then she realized that Nona had called her Artis for the first time since they had first met. Not bitch, not cowboy, not whore, not so, utter brain, milk mother, or even spunk bubble. How did she manage to think of all those names? I well regards, Nona. Still utterly perplexed, she offered. Too late. The Silverette squeaked out, shrugging her shoulders slightly before freezing in place as she glanced past Artis. She turned back to Nona and nodded her head. Agreed. Artis turned around to see a pair of bright eyes staring at the two, his face forming a mixture of annoyance and displeasure. When Nona saw his chains moving quickly, he held up a large metal slab that resembled the door but was warped and distorted. His bright eyes looked over the two as he walked forward, ignoring their clothing, or lack thereof, and gently placed a hand on Artis's head, saying, Artis, and Nona, try not to break my door next time. He snapped his fingers, causing the metal to return to its original shape. The baths are supposed to be a place to unwind. If you feel the need to beat on each other, please use the training grounds, he said, pointing to a corner of the room before making a motion with his finger as though he were calling someone over. Did you think I wouldn't notice you, dear sister? The air twisted slightly as Lilith left the corner and introduced herself to the others. Artis had never met this person before, but they felt oddly familiar. She raised her gaze to Naruto, observing his disguised form, and then turned to Lilith, who shocked her by how much they resembled each other. His blue was only replaced by black on her. After a moment of contemplation, Lilith put a finger to her chin and cocked her head slightly. Brother, do you want me to undress too? Or do you not think this is a nude party? I believe it would be preferred if you kept your clothing on, Onisama, said Gabriel in a surprisingly stern yet warm voice as Nona and Artis looked at each other, taking in each other's appearance. Artis quickly covered herself while sporting a rather large blush, while Nona pursed her lips slightly before clicking her fingers and having a towel appear in the air next to her. She wrapped it gently around herself and looked at Lilith, who appeared to be fiddling with the strap that barely held her dress on her sensual body. Onisama? Artis asked, staring at the two women in disbelief. Even with her limited knowledge of Japanese, she thought it odd that Lilith was referred to as her sister. Gabriel smiled kindly at the young arbiter, but it was Naruto who responded, his gaze darting to Lilith, seemingly sending a silent message to the woman who laughed sheepishly. Gabriel married into my family. Nevertheless, she is as much a member of my family as Lilith is. Onisama is not an odd way to refer to Lilith because she is older, albeit not by much. He saw Artis' bewilderment and paused, his lips pursed in contemplation, before nodding slightly. But if we were on my home world, even if she was younger, that would be the proper way to call her, as if someone was stronger than you. They were above you in all sense of the matter. He said, I'm not from this world, though I've been here on Earth for a bit longer than people have. A lot of angels misunderstand Naruto. That is because they continue to believe that he is an angel to begin with. Michael had said to Artis as she watched the blonde male closely while Gabriel draped a bathrobe over her shoulders. She found it difficult to accept that he was from a different planet, and she had repeated those words over and over. Naruto was not an angel, but he was also not a devil. She was aware that he was older than both of them and even older than humans, but she couldn't help but think back to their first encounter, when she had genuinely thought he was an angel because he was so lovely above a field of death, knew exactly what to say, and welcomed her without hesitation. She had a taste of Nona's strength, It was unsettling to confront someone who was so much stronger than her, but to Nona, she was still insufficient. She could only assume that Nona had been talking about Naruto. If that were the case, there were probably people at his level of strength on a different planet. To be able to assist him with what he had planned, that terrified her so much that she had overheard a few conversations in which Michael asked Naruto if everything was going according to his plan, but the blonde appeared to be a little evasive when the question was raised, almost as if he was afraid to respond aloud. She nodded slightly and said, "I think I understand," only to see Naruto shrug and put a hand on his chin. "No you don't." He frequently told her that she didn't understand what he was explaining to her, which infuriated her because she would have understood if she had said so, right? Despite the fact that she had looked over some of his notes at a time, Nona had been carrying them to his forge. To think that he could understand drawings and symbols like that just by looking at them. She spent hours trying to figure out what the few she could recall could possibly mean, but Nona claimed that they were merely drafts for reference and contained very little in comparison to his actual notes. She put a gentle hand on her chest. He had given her wings and made her so powerful in what seemed like a split second. Did they really see the world so differently that she would never comprehend him? She looked at Nona. Before attempting to do the same to her boss, as it were, she would need to try to understand her silverette comrade. Artist tensed up as she saw Naruto approach her, lowering himself slightly to her level, and gently dabbing at her forehead with a washcloth he had, she assumed, conjured up to wipe away the blood that had gushed from her skull from the impact without asking any questions. "Have the two of you reached a consensus? You felt secure in his presence because of his soothing, soft voice." "I'm not sure if she was saying the right thing," Artist said. "I would like to think we understand each other better than before." He finished with the washcloth, and it caught fire before he gave her hair a gentle shake. She looked at Nona, who appeared unconcerned by her remarks, and gave a slight shrug. Naruto turned to face Nona, his eyes narrowing just enough for Artist to see, but enough for the object of his attention to do so. "I'll make an effort to be more understanding and take my time explaining things." "How about your temper? I assumed you pleased with my temper." "I do, and in the future it won't be a problem, but Artist is still not used to her body, so you have to be careful," he said, putting a gentle kiss on her forehead while a cunning smile appeared on the blonde's face. "Actually, there are a lot of similarities between your relationship and the one Michael and I had when we were younger, much younger." They were drawn to Gabriel by a melodic giggle, and she raised a hand to try to muffle the sound, but it was too late. Realizing she was being watched, she chose to go along with it. "Naruto and Michael had a fight that nearly tore heaven in half once," Gabriel said from memory. "It was also about something very minor, but it kept getting worse until you could ask any angel about it. Yes, it had to do with a particular kind of food." Naruto said sharply. "Ramen is not just a type of food." Gabriel, letting out a sigh as he combed his hair and paused for a second before scowling. "Another failed test." He muttered more to himself than to anyone else before he disappeared from the room. After observing the bewilderment on their faces, Lilith pouted and said, "He is always getting caught up in his projects. He is trying to make a new Omega." Her statement was sufficient to draw Gabriel's attention. "Yes, the power source is quite unstable at the moment. I believe the previous Omega was flawless at what it was intended to do." Seraph, the blonde, asked. "Its output has been increased by more than 100%. Lilith, however, didn't seem to care much about their confusion. She had only brought it up to ensure they understood that Naruto wasn't calling them failures. He wouldn't do that to them, but his words could have been interpreted as such. It can no longer be sustained by the outdated power source." Gently pinching the bridge of her nose, Gabriel said, "That would explain his frustration." Grayfia muttered, "Indeed," which surprised many because most people had forgotten she was there. "It also explains why he has been in his forge this much lately. Maybe I ought to go see Ajuka and ask them if they can come up with something." Grayfia pursed her lips together and said, "It irritates me when they do that." Her question was passed between Gabriel and Lilith before the latter disappeared, much like Naruto had done earlier. Gabriel said with a slight widening of her eyes, "Oh good, I am not the only one then." Greece, Archopolis, Athens. He was by himself, and this was going to be a taxing conversation without others around him as it was. So Naruto walked calmly down the wide streets. Ignoring the confused looks from those around him. Having to explain details as they went along would only make him more irritated. He found the enormous, immaculately kept pond, walked out to the center, stood on top of the water, and drew a big circle with his index finger as he entered a grand garden that was a part of the temple there, ignoring the looks that were directed at him. He closed his eyes for a moment, already aware that the transportation was quick but also very different from his own method. The water outside the circle was disturbed while the liquid inside remained perfectly still, capturing his image for a few more moments before swallowing him whole. His feet struck the ground of Mount Olympus, his destination, and he felt many blades and spears aimed at him. He opened an eye and saw the people, a mixture of heroes who had managed to live on the base of the mountain of the gods to protect it. His lips thinned as he stared at the path he had to take before moving forward, ignoring the splatters of those around him. Stop. In a somewhat authoritative tone, one was able to escape. With a slight interest in his eyes, or perhaps it was just the direction of the light, Naruto rolled his shoulders lightly and spread his wings wide. Observing the heroes leap back out of the way, a lightning strike struck the path in front of the blonde a moment later, and he said, "Ah, it seems that they know that I am here now." Before the pantheon descended from the lofty clouds above, everyone heard a rumbling sound. The hero bowed deeply and glared at the blonde, who appeared to be defiant in their gaze, saying, "Why you should bow before your betters?" He was the leader of the pantheon and the strongest being in existence to the heroes, so when they saw him and those who followed him bow to the blonde stranger, they were shocked. "You have changed, my prince," said the pantheon leader in a surprisingly gentle tone. Zeus, an older man with graying hair that reached his shoulders and was held in place by a thin golden band, was wearing a white toga over his body and straw sandals over his feet. "The circumstances have changed, so I had to as well. If I can't transform into a leader deserving of my people, I won't be able to protect them from oppression. Zeus, is my dream still being followed by your pantheon?" Naruto's eyes took on an odd expression, as if he were anxious about the response he would soon get. However, Zeus stepped forward forcefully and gave the boy a shoulder clap, saying, "We still believe in you, my prince, but we are unable to provide true aid due to the current state of Greece." "I have heard so much about the prince, yet I never met him," she said, drawing their attention to a person in the back who, like Zeus, was dressed in a toga and sandals. Her skin was olive. Her hazelnut hair was pulled back into a wavy ponytail, and her eyes were a pale blue that seemed out of place on her body. "I see no problem helping the prince and learning more about him at the same time, because my acolytes have their own orders and my temples are about learning, not warfare." One of Naruto's grandmothers, Aphrodite, appeared a little farther back and giggled. "Is little Athena pleased by the appearance of my handsome grandchild?" Her hair was wavy and a brighter shade of red, but otherwise she looked almost exactly like Naruto's mother. With a raised eyebrow toward Athena, Naruto said, "A new goddess?" When he asked, Zeus laughed heartily. Zeus turned to his daughter and grinned broadly, saying, "Yes, one of my daughters may even be as intelligent as you. My prince, why don't you greet the real king of everything, my dear?" "I am Athena, daughter of Z," Athena said, raising an eyebrow as she observed the blonde. "The Titan Slayer is Zeus, and the Titan is Métis. Your demeanor would give the impression that you are confident in your skills, but based on what I've observed, you merely provide guidance and have never made a big impression on your own. Otherwise, I would have paid more attention to you. Your family has grown significantly since I last saw you, Zeus," Naruto said, raising a hand to his temple and gently massaging it. "Even though you were offering your assistance, I cannot really see what you hold to offer me. However, what happened to Métis? Did she not accompany you to Earth?" A set of perky breasts rubbed against the blonde's back as a pair of arms wrapped around his shoulders. "Naruto, why don't we put this dull conversation off until later? Aphrodite, I'd rather you keep your hands to yourself. I am no longer a child in need of praising. Actually, I think your performance right now is really offensive. Additionally, I've had to speak with several partners due to the nature of your skills and your wilder tendencies. Do you realize how challenging that has been for my living situation, not to mention that I will have to explain everything to Kerrigan?" Though those in front could see the slight twitch in his brow, he spoke calmly and said, "No, I think you can do that. That is if you wish to continue displays like this after all." Although they seemed to be of the same age and it was obvious that the woman found the man attractive, Aphrodite tightened her hold on her grandchild, even though if one were to look at them without knowing that relationship, one might think they were close friends or even lovers. "Now that isn't very nice," she said. "However, I could always demonstrate some of my methods to truly enhance the pleasure in the bedroom if you're having problems." "Oh brother, did you finally call me for a threesome?" asked Lilith, who appeared next to the blonde with an inquisitive expression as Naruto clicked his fingers and a black bolt of lightning burst through the air. Not knowing that Naruto had a sibling, the red-haired goddess and many of the people around her blinked in surprise at those words. Excuse me?" With a hint of surprise, Aphrodite asked. "Meet Lilith. This is what happens when I separate myself into half for too long," Naruto said, gesturing toward her. "I don't have to point out which half she was, do I? I think I was the better half. It sounds so dull to hear about what you did after we split up," Lilith said, licking her lips a little. "I must admit, though, I do not remember our grandmother being so beautiful." Yes, you are differently a descendant of mine," Aphrodite said, widening her eyes before leaping off Naruto and encircling the black-haired beauty with her arms, searching every available inch. Naruto said sardonically. To deal with a sexual deviant you need only to add another, before turning back to Athena. Do you want to come of your own volition? I do, as I mentioned. I've heard stories about you, but I don't really know much about you. I have heard that you have been a tactical genius for a considerable amount of time. Athena explained, simply blinking twice at the blonde. So yes, I do find you interesting and offered myself to your cause, though I do not agree with the act of war. Sometimes it is unavoidable. From what I have heard of Virgil, there is no other option. She also mentioned that you had made great advancements back on our home planet, despite being so young, even going so far as to be revered as an equal to the Dark Gods. Although the Dark Gods made many advances, they were a stain on history, one that Kaguya erased in any case. Her words had captured everyone's attention, and for good reason. The Dark Gods were not mentioned, however. Kaguya could not bring herself to kill her own sister, so she sent her to the Void, where she would be imprisoned for the rest of time. Everyone is aware of the Lady in the Void, but very few truly know who she is. Naruto discovered this when he merged with the Void. Essentially, it was restricted to the royal line and those in charge of Earth's mythologies. However, it was more apparent that the Pantheon was unaware of Athena's knowledge of the Dark Gods. Virgil is not a moron. He will anticipate that I will raise an army to oppose him. Our worlds will be rocked to their cores once more by this war. It is for that reason that I brought a large number of gods from the core worlds with me. I hold no doubt that many more will join us as we approach, but this was the most that myself and Jiraiya could bring without making it seem far-fetched for guard detail, Naruto said, feeling a slight ache in his chest at the mention of the white-haired male. It also leads to the reason why I am here, two of them actually. The first was to check that you were still with me, he said. Okay then, and secondly, I need help building a power source that can handle the output of 2 capital ships. What could you be building that requires that much energy? Zeus asked, his eyes widening in surprise. I am upgrading Omega. I had thought that machine was already perfect, at least that is the feeling we had from your previous game, laughed the father of the Greek pantheon. Far from the truth, Naruto sighed slightly. I want to increase his power to that of a god-slaying class golem. Is he not? Many of the others had the same expression of surprise on their faces as Zeus, who asked in mild shock. No, the blond man said, shaking his head slightly. Although he can battle on the level of gods, his power output is only at the level of a high-class nation ruler at the moment. Omega has been able to make up this difference thanks to his tactical acumen and his cunning in combat for no other reason than knowing that I could defeat him in battle if necessary. I had raised him to that level, however. I can now push him farther and have. All I need is a new power source. Omega is a creation of the prince, Zeus said, stroking his beard as he observed his daughter's perplexed expression. A sort of golem that fights alongside him. It demonstrates the prince's unadulterated talent for creating a machine that can imitate and pick up fighting techniques from people it observes, modifying them into its own special brand of fighting to counter any danger to the prince. Ares once struggled against it. The prince can't have more than one. It's a good thing on that as well. Omega is stupidly smart, not quite at the level of the prince, the orange-haired god in question said, rubbing at a patch over his right eye, the tissue behind it holding an empty and terrified socket. However, having more would give them an opportunity to rebel. What gives it the name, Omega? Is that not the end? Athena asked, and she had good reason to think so. The match is coming to an end when that golem enters the field because Omega signals the end of the match. Zeus turned to face the stoic blonde, but I think this talk of long ago is just a waste of time now. Once Omega was created, along with Alpha and Beta, the prince never lost a match. Yes, the Athena, when you're ready. Gather your belongings and come to my heavenly district. Would you like to travel back with me? Lilith, once you've finished trying to develop a penis so you can rape your grandmother? As soon as Naruto waved his hand aside, his sister's delicate fingers touched his palm. Lilith paused at his neck, then leaned in and nibbled lightly on his collarbone. I have been a good girl, haven't I? She said, smiling seductively. I will come whenever you call, brother, she said. You have? She purred and rubbed her breasts against his chest. I have also convinced Ajuka to come and help with Omega, she said. Naruto put an arm around Lilith's waist and said, it will be nice to catch up with Ajuka. As I haven't seen him in a while, between the three of us, we should find an outcome. What do you want? I'm looking for a prize. It's going to be really, really nice for you too, brother. Okay. Let's discuss it privately later, the demoness purred. Athena disappeared in a flash of light, saying she was going to get her belongings, leaving Naruto with the gods and Lilith once more. However, his grandmother now chose to join his sister. Naruto would laugh at her and then shrug inwardly. Heaven, in addition to trying to calm her queasy stomach from the quick disintegration and reconstruction of her body from the mode of transportation, Athena's eyes widened as her feet touched the ground and she took in her surroundings. The sight of the enormous golden pillars that extended far into the sky, past the clouds in her line of sight, was beyond words, and the atmosphere this place exuded was one of peace and nothing mattered. She heard a low whistle coming from her left, and when she turned to look, she saw a strange man with green hair surveying her surroundings. It is brighter than I expected the other side lives like this. Then it's interesting. I wonder how they manage to finish their work if they feel this good all the time. Ah, you must be Ajuka and Athena. We have been waiting for you. A shorter blonde woman said politely. A silverette appeared to be watching over her shoulder as she said, "My name is Artis, behind me is Nona, we will be your guides. I will take Ajuka around, you two titty girls can spend your time together." Nona sighed after staring at Athena for a while. Then she trotted forward and stopped in front of the male in question. Naruto will be joining us at the end of the tour, so to say. He was dragged into the Seraphim Council as soon as he arrived back. We, his arbiters, will look after you until then. Sometimes these things happen, though I could understand Heaven's feelings on the matter at hand, Ajuka said after examining the woman for a short while. Having a devil and a Greek goddess appear in heaven must shake things up a little, no? Oh no. When Gabriel and Grayfia learned that Athena would be arriving, they had a brief argument. As the roof collapsed, Nona trailed off lightly as she grabbed onto Ajuka and Athena before racing to the other side of the room. And someone insulted Grayfia, she said, pressing a pair of fingers into the side of her temple and gently rubbing it. To be honest, the Seraphim aren't all that worried about the two of you being here, instead spending a great deal of time trying to figure out how to tell Naruto to keep Grayfia and Gabriel under control. A seraph shouldn't make comments like that, Raphael, Naruto's lecturing voice said as he floated down to the ground and gave the seraph a light slap on the cheek. Now look at what you have done, putting on such a shameful display for our guests, he said as a blonde-haired male emerged from the rubble, dusting himself off, removing small bits from his hair, and wiping away what was stuck in his stubble. What are we going to do with you? We shouldn't interact with people like them. We don't require it. Now that father is gone, we are in charge. The Ultima. He was interrupted as a fist entered his stomach, spitting out and splattering onto Naruto's immaculate white outfit, which only included a shirt and slacks but still had a unique appearance. Raphael, we have made the decision to offer the other factions a branch of peace. It would be treason to the Seraphim Council to go against this ruling. Must we remind you of the punishment meted out to traitors? You must remember Rabibile, right? Although Naruto's voice had a commanding edge that many were not accustomed to, Nona herself had only heard it once or perhaps twice. He spoke calmly. Without looking into his eyes, Raphael lowered his head and said, I might have said something out of turn. Very well, all is forgiven, though a second time will not be, Naruto said, nodding in apparent satisfaction with his response. It would be wise to keep that in mind. I think I need to fix a couple floors before we can proceed. So Uriel, if you could take Raphael to get treated. Nona sighed with exhaustion as the two disappeared, leaving the guests and arbiters alone once more. We really should start, she said. You don't have to worry about being disturbed while you are here because we have reserved rooms for you in the restricted area. She waved her hand lightly for Ajuka to follow. We have been granted full access to the facilities of the restricted section for the tour, and judging from the information I have on you, I believe we should start our tour from the research labs and continue through to the library. Only those with Naruto's extended permission are allowed to enter, and you both made that rather exclusive list, she said. That sounds nice, but is everything okay? Ajuka asked with a slight nod. Naruto appears to be experiencing some difficulties with the Seraphim Council. Nona then led Ajuka away, leaving Artis and Athena behind. There are reasons for that, it is not my place to speak of them, though Naruto is more than capable of dealing with the issues that arise, she said. Please do not mind Nona, the blonde said, grinning nervously at the goddess. She's a little set in her ways, to be honest. She is a good person, but occasionally her behavior can get her into some trouble. So, Lady Athena, are you prepared to start? I was under the impression that King Arthur resided in heaven and worked for the prince, Athena said, looking around for a few moments with a puzzled expression on her face. Is it possible for us to meet before the tour begins? Artis chuckled nervously and scratched the back of her head, saying, you already have. Lady Athena, I am Arthur. This is impressive, but it also worries me. Will the prince only associate with attractive women, even if it means transforming men into the former? After tapping her lips several times, the brunette scowled a little. No, heavens no, Artis said, squeaking and then shaking her hands wildly. Simply put, I pretended to be a man because women were not regarded as deserving leaders. This is not the first instance of a miscommunication like this, but trust me when I say that Naruto has been incredibly understanding and kind to my predicament. There is empathy in the Prince of Chaos, Athena muttered to herself, rather than to Artis. I wouldn't have guessed that. The Chaos Prince? The young blonde asked bewilderedly. Do you not know who you serve? Asked the brunette with blue eyes. cocking her head slightly to the side. Well, aside from the fact that Naruto is from a different planet and isn't who he seems to be. No, I don't really know, Artist said. Averting her gaze briefly, did anyone else know? The prince is a member of the ruling family. They own the water surrounding the planet, the stars that adorn the night sky, and the air you breathe. Everything you touch and see belongs to them. Although Prince Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze Otsutsuki is the legitimate ruler, his uncle, who is currently known as Virgil Kinslayer in the pantheons, is in power. He killed Naruto's parents, and because of his youth, Naruto had to cede the throne to his uncle, who swiftly altered the law to ensure that he would hold it until he was overthrown, Athena swiftly clarified while Artist listened with wide eyes. In summary, even though heaven is not yet aware of it, you and we all serve the real ruler of everything, Athena said with a gentle wave of her hand. However, I think you wanted to show me around this restricted area. With a slight nod, Artist continued to process what she had just learned. Yes, I will show you the bedrooms first so we can finish the tour in the libraries, where I think you might want to spend more time. It's not necessary. I will simply trade information with the prince if I need to know it. The young arbiter began to cry inwardly because everything was getting too much for her. Why was she stuck with the goddess, who seemed to only want to do what she had planned? Why couldn't she get a Juka, who seemed so much more laid back than Athena? Then it dawned on her, how about we just do a quick tour of the facilities and then we can spend a long time in the baths? I have experienced the baths of Olympus. Her statement, these ones have the essence of Eden inside them, seemed to resonate with the goddess, which was beneficial even though it was somewhat of a lie. They possessed Naruto's essence, though perhaps not because he was the one who created Eden. Athena curtly said, I shall let you lead me, since none of her dearest sisters could claim to have taken a bath in Eden's waters. Even as the others left the room, Grayfia and Gabriel remained kneeling in the center of a circular room that was the Seraphim Council's chambers, with Michael sitting across from him and Naruto sitting directly in front of them, both of them with their heads bent. The judgmental looks had, to be honest, had a significant impact on Gabriel during her case. They had some right to do so, given that level 3 and level 4 of heaven needed to be fixed following her little spat with Grayfia. Normally, Gabriel was on the outside of the circle, looking at the person speaking rather than being the one being looked at. Michael was grinning nervously at the people who were still present, which included Naruto, Gabriel, himself, and Grayfia. Lilith had disappeared, and nobody was really sure where she had gone. But at least Naruto didn't appear to be in a panic, so she must have said something to him at some point. We didn't mean to cause you such troubles, Naruto-sama, Grayfia almost whispered, but given how quiet the room was, she might as well have shouted it to the heavens. Nevertheless, that was the current state of affairs. Naruto began to sigh. I understand that sometimes you just need to release yourself, he said, occasionally letting out pent-up frustration. Just when such a time comes, please keep yourself to the restricted area. Too much attention is drawn to us all by fights that extend into the rest of heaven. We don't want the lower-ranking angels to think we're being attacked. The fact that your fight occurred now is more problematic than the fact that it extended to the lower districts. The faction's peace, if we can even call it that, is so brittle that it could be irreversibly broken by the smallest slip. Gabriel winced at his remarks. She hadn't considered it that way. He had been trying very hard to repair the harm done to the ties between the three factions, but her altercation with Grayfia that extended into the civilian areas might have been interpreted by the devils as a declaration of war, and her continued involvement could have been interpreted as the order to begin. Reflect on your actions, Grayfia said. Flinching at the sound of a chair moving, she was unable to look up for fear of seeing disappointment in his eyes. I think you wanted to meet some of our allies, Michael. It seems like it might be a pleasant change of pace, the chief seraph said calmly, a gentle smile spreading across his face. I think they should be in good moods after the tours given by your arbiters. As he opened the door, Naruto nodded slightly and said, I believe so. Nona doesn't think that Ajuka is a pain, so she is putting in some effort, while Artis has just gotten out of the baths with Athena. Well, should I ask someone to make tea in the garden for us? Naruto was about to shut the door when he paused, his brow slightly raised, saying, a sound idea, Michael. Would you two stay there or would you accompany us? Blurs of gold and silver appeared on either side of him, almost causing him to jump back. The strange shoes of Naruto scuffed ever so lightly against the floor, resembling a butterfly's wings kissing the soft skin of a person lounging in a meadow, and the door to the council chambers closed with a gentle click. It was something Naruto had drilled into them. Their feet and bodies should always be light so you can dodge, dip, or weave out of a fatal blow at any time. Grayfia was equally soft in her strides, and ghosts would strain their hearing just to make sure these people were actually touching the ground. She found it difficult to believe that she had once been merely a servant girl to the longtime friend of her current lover. She gritted her teeth and bit back the feeling, wondering how they had been friends and what could have happened to turn an angel so damned crooked. The Silverette had become accustomed to life in heaven, but the food was far better than what she was used to, and she was frequently ejected from her self-imposed role as a maid. She had heard that Naruto was the reason he became that way, that he had simply been made wrong, that he was made from her lover's dark side. Although Lilith was a creature made from that side, not just the leftovers, the raven-haired woman appeared to be far from evil. Jealousy. She heard a very faint whisper. There was a good chance that Lucifer was fully aware that Lilith was a part of Naruto. A perfect half of his soul did Lilith transform him into the miserable creature she had previously encountered. The raven-haired woman who desired nothing more than to sleep with the creature from which she originated. It seems that Lilith had loved Lucifer once, but she only hated him after he took her child and imprisoned her. This caused a lot of confusion because the Lilith she knew was actually her daughter, as far as Grayfia could tell, and Lucifer had given her the same name as her mother in order to fill the void that had been left by Lilith's love for him. Why did this happen? Was he really afraid she would turn against him, the way Jiraiya did, the way Naruto, Michael, Gabriel, and all the other angels did? Obsession. The whisper came again, and this time it made no sense, but what could he have been so fixated on that he had been exiled from heaven? Even though it was obvious that the others disliked talking about Lucifer, Naruto continued to refer to the man as his friend despite her lips being slightly pursed in thought. She dared not discuss it with them, and any conversation about him was swiftly redirected. She felt uncomfortable and wondered what Lucifer had done to deserve the wrath of everyone in heaven while still being regarded as a friend by the one who ought to be in charge of the plane. She couldn't understand why Naruto, who ought to be in charge of the plane, wouldn't take Jiraiya's place, either because he was still grieving over the losses he had suffered during the Great War or because he refused to stand up and take her place. She noticed that although his back was broad and provided protection, he was lacking something.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.